I'm your bedtime historian, and tonight I'm inviting you into a mansion so polished you'd never guess it's rotting from the inside out. Behind the velvet drapes and gaslit hallways, a darker story curls through the walls, one of hidden mold, creaking timbers, and a slow decay polite society chose never to see. What secrets did the wainscoting swallow? Who heard the floorboards whisper before they gave way? If the thought of secret rot makes you oddly sleepy, why not press that like and subscribe button? I promise, these ghostly walls won't collapse on us, at least not tonight. And if you're half awake, somewhere in a creaky old house, I'd love to know, what century do you think your walls remember? Now draw your blanket tight. Listen for that soft creak underfoot, and follow me through the polished facade that hides what no guest should ever find. You pause at the threshold of this grand Victorian hallway, soothed by the muffled tick of a grandfather clock that's outlived its builder by a century. The air carries a faint scent of beeswax polish and damp timber, an uneasy marriage that no amount of cleaning can disguise. Beneath your slippers, the floorboards groan in protest, each step a reminder that beauty here is only skin deep. Victorian architects loved to parade their wealth through glossy wood panels and carved balustrades, drawing visitors' eyes away from what lurked behind the plaster. It was a time when a flawless facade meant more than sturdy beams appearances could make or break a family's place in polite society. Yet the cost of such perfection was paid in quiet rot. Cheap pine hidden behind mahogany veneers, rushed constructions that trapped damp air joists nibbled by unseen beetles, while household gossip rattled the chandeliers overhead. There's a curious pleasure in knowing that these grand entrances were often more illusion than strength. Some historians argue that the Victorians' obsession with appearances was their own undoing, an ironic twist for an era that claimed to master both industry and morals. Even now, you run your finger along a polished banister that feels cold, hiding a spine of soft decay beneath its lacquer. Take a moment to imagine the visitors who swept through this same hall in starched collars and wide skirts, praising its craftsmanship, while ignoring the tiny telltale signs, a faint damp patch near the skirting board, a floorboard that dips ever so slightly underfoot. These small betrayals were easy to overlook, especially when the gas lights flickered so invitingly above. You might smile at the thought of well-heeled guests raising a glass in the drawing room, oblivious to the fact that the walls behind their laughter were gnawed hollow by woodworm. Even the servants knew better. They heard the soft tapping at night, the sigh of beams settling just a little too deeply into the foundations. And while your eyes drift across the ornate crown moldings, remember, all this grandeur came at a cost no one wanted to pay up front. Instead, they borrowed against the future a mortgage of damp and termites, trusting that by the time it crumbled, someone else would foot the bill. It's the same logic that built empires and buried secrets beneath floorboards that now creak under your weight. So you move slowly through this hallway, feeling its age breathe around you, polish and mildew, luxury and neglect. If you press your ear to the wall, you might hear it sigh, a century's worth of secrets stitched into lath and plaster. Some say you shouldn't dwell on the flaws of the past, but isn't it oddly comforting to know that even perfection leaks when no one's looking? There's an old story, one hardly ever mentioned in the official histories, about a grand townhouse in Mayfair that collapsed in on itself one summer afternoon. No fire, no flood, just the quiet betrayal of timbers that had held too many secrets for too long. Witnesses said the facade stayed standing for a moment, like a cardboard stage set, before folding in a cloud of plaster dust and polite lies. Historians still debate whether that house was an outlier or a sign of a much larger rot beneath the era's polished veneer. As you stand here now, your footsteps echo along the corridor of a world that looks so firm and yet is always on the brink of giving way. Behind each gilded cornice hides a splinter of truth. Sometimes beauty is only as deep as the varnish, and beneath it lies a softness that time alone reveals. So you linger a while longer in this deceptive hallway. Trace the wallpaper's edge, tap the skirting board, listen for the sigh of the house settling under secrets it was never meant to hold. When you're ready, we'll slip deeper inside where the gas lights flicker with a warmth that might just kill you softly if the walls don't do it first. The gaslight flickers above you, soft, warm, and quietly treacherous. Once you step away from the deceptive hallway, you find yourself beneath a row of ornate gas sconces. Their gentle flame casts a honeyed glow on silk wallpaper and polished portraits. It feels comforting, almost modern in its promise of steady light, so different from the sputtering candles and smoky oil lamps that came before. But lean too close, breathe too deep, and the illusion unravels with every quiet hiss of burning gas. You stand still, nose catching a faint whiff of something sharp coal gas mixed with stale air. It's the kind of scent that doesn't alarm you at first. In Victorian parlors, it meant progress, civility, a touch of urban elegance. Households that could afford gaslight proudly showed it off, boasting of cleaner flames and fewer scorched drapes. Guests would sit beneath the warm glow, gossiping over tea, never suspecting the same flame slowly leached poison into their lungs. Doctors of the day were quick to blame fainting spells and headaches on weak nerves or delicate constitutions, especially among women. They didn't see the invisible carbon monoxide drifting through the lace curtains or the coal tar residues collecting behind polished mantels. To admit that your proud modern gaslight was slowly poisoning you, that was unthinkable. Better to blame the vapors on a lady's corset than the flickering light above her head. You trace your eyes along the brass pipe feeding each sconce. Hidden behind walls and floorboards, these pipes carried more than light. They ferried tiny leaks and quiet drafts of death into every corner of the home. Servants learned quickly to crack windows when cleaning the lamps, muttering about dizziness they wouldn't dare mention to their masters. Some household staff swore by fresh-cut sprigs of lavender, stuffed in apron pockets, half charm, half wishful filter against the creeping fumes. In the wealthier houses, entire rooms were designed to show off these new gas fittings. Drawing rooms with marble mantels, bedrooms with dainty wall lamps, even grand staircases lined with flickering flames like watchful eyes. The irony never dulled the brighter the house, the darker the unseen air that filled its rooms. Some historians still argue how many deaths were caused not by disease or bad luck, but by a modern convenience that no one questioned too closely. Imagine the hush at a dinner party when a guest suddenly swooned, perhaps a case of nerves, they'd whisper, fanning her gently as the lamps hissed above. A discreet trip to the fainting room, a splash of cold water, and the gas kept flowing. Better to breathe poison than return to the darkness of candles and oil, they reasoned. Progress required sacrifice, even if that sacrifice was measured in headaches, miscarriages, or sudden silence behind a closed bedroom door. You move closer to one wall sconce, studying its fluted glass shade. Inside, the small flame dances politely, as if unaware of its sinister side. There's a beauty in its simplicity one tiny flame chasing away shadows that once haunted every corner. And yet the cost of this warm glow was written in carbon monoxide and coal tar residues that yellowed curtains and weakened lungs, leaving their mark long after the flame flickered out. A curious footnote in old journals speaks of families who left town for holidays only to return to houses steeped in stale gas. A single leak, a draft under a door, and entire households could be found asleep in their beds forever. Local newspapers buried these stories under polite euphemisms. After all, who would question the miracle of gaslight when it turned night into day at the flick of a valve? There's an unspoken irony in how the same households that feared burglars' gossip and scandal gave no thought to the quiet killer that glowed so warmly above their heads. Servants, meanwhile, learned to sniff the air, to watch for headaches that wouldn't go away, to wedge a drafty window open even on damp nights. They carried their secrets in whispers behind scullery doors, knowing that no master wanted to hear that his shining new fittings might be the death of him. Some quack inventors saw a market in this silent dread. They hawked purifiers and fancy ventilators, gilded grates, promising to scrub the air clean. Many didn't work. Some even made things worse, trapping fumes inside tight drawing rooms. But the illusion of safety was enough to sell them by the dozens. Historians still puzzle over whether these gadgets helped or merely gave anxious homeowners something pretty to polish and adjust while the gas kept seeping out. Step back now and look again at the gentle glow around you. It's easy to see why no one wanted to give it up. Gaslight meant late-night reading glittering dinner parties, the quiet thrill of modernity. It turned city streets into rivers of gold. After dusk, transformed cozy parlors into bright salons where secrets and scandals flowed as freely as tea. Who would blow out that flame just because it carried a price hidden in headaches and hush? You stand still for a moment longer, feeling the soft warmth on your face. Somewhere behind the walls, the pipes hiss and whisper a reminder that the promise of progress always comes with an invisible cost. Some say the Victorians were foolish to trust so blindly in their modern marvels. Others argue they knew exactly what they were risking and simply chose to glow a little brighter, a little longer, and worry about the poison later. So take one last look at the flickering flame. Let your eyes drift half shut, as if you too might drift off beneath its quiet hum. And when you're ready, follow me deeper into this house, where the next layer of poison waits woven right into the pastel wallpaper that lines these genteel walls. There's a hush to this room that feels oddly pleasant until you remember the walls themselves are whispering poison. Step closer to the faded green wallpaper just beyond the gaslit parlor. Brush your fingertips across its once vibrant pattern of vines and blossoms, a symbol of prosperity in a time when colorful interiors shouted wealth as loudly as the family silver. Under your touch, the paper feels dry, a little crumbly at the seams, its pastel charm concealing something far more sinister. In the 19th century, the soft green you see now was all the rage, a tint so bright and fresh it made drawing rooms look alive in an age of coal smoke and dull winter gloom. The secret to that verdant beauty was Sheila's green or Paris green pigments laced with arsenic that clung to the fibers like a polite death sentence. To the Victorian eye, these walls bloomed with modernity and good taste. Guests admired them during tea, mothers rocked babies beneath them, and children traced the winding vines while drifting off to sleep. Meanwhile, the paper slowly shed tiny flakes of poison with every damp breeze, every scrub of a maid's cloth. Some families even complained that the walls smelled sweet, a clue they didn't understand. The scent was arsenic released into the air, gently perfuming the room where people laughed, read letters, and breathed it all in. Servants bore the brunt of it, of course. They spent hours dusting, scrubbing, and hanging new rolls when fashions changed. Many complained of rashes that never healed, of raw hands and eyes that watered endlessly in closed rooms. Doctors, perplexed by the sudden weakness of otherwise healthy workers, blamed their poor hygiene or moral failings, never the walls themselves. Scholars still puzzle over whether these deaths were accidents of ignorance or quiet sacrifices for the sake of beauty. One peculiar detail that has survived the decades is the popularity of children's nurseries drenched in arsenic green. Parents who could afford the best for their little ones often chose this fresh, cheerful hue for bedroom walls. It was thought to be uplifting, sweet relief from gray city fog. They didn't see how damp nurseries with tiny fingers picking at peeling edges turned innocent walls into quiet killers. Babies fell ill with mysterious ailments, and doctors whispered of frail constitutions, never suspecting that the pastel bloom on the walls was part of the rot. Some families, more suspicious than others, tore down the offending paper at the first sign of sickness, only to replace it with a new roll of a different arsenic mix. Manufacturers swore it was harmless if dry, that only damp rooms posed a risk. They blamed the weather, the maid's poor work, the family's own luck, anything but the pigments that made Victorian interiors so enviable. You can almost picture a lady of the house running her hand along these same walls, proud of the perfect seam, the cheerful green brightening her parlor. She'd host bridge parties beneath its sheen, gossiping about scandals, while her guests dabbed at damp foreheads and wondered why they left feeling worse than they arrived. The wallpaper stayed. The coughs and headaches became just another cost of polite society. Some quacks, ever opportunists, hawked remedies for arsenic poisoning of the air. Herbal sachets, special wall wash solutions, curious copper charms to draw out the poison, none of which worked. But they gave anxious families something to do, a small defense against a threat they couldn't quite name. In diaries and letters, these superstitions linger hints of a quiet panic papered over with politeness and profit. Look closely, and you'll see the small signs that gave it away, discolored patches where damp seeped in curious green dust, collecting on skirting boards. Children's toys stained a faint jade where tiny hands touched. Servants would mutter about it behind kitchen doors, and rumors sometimes drifted into gossip columns. Yet the bright walls stayed up until fashion changed, or death forced a family to repaint one poison swapped for another in a dance of polite denial. When you breathe in now, you imagine the sweetness described in old letters. Some guests said the scent reminded them of cut grass, others of almonds, a smell that lured them to stay a little longer in rooms that quietly stole their breath. Historians still puzzle over whether the true danger came more from the flakes that fell or the gas that seeped out unseen, mixing with the coal smoke and gaslight to brew a perfect storm of household peril. And still, it's strangely comforting to stand here tracing faded vines that outlived their makers. The poison is long gone, the danger neutralized by time and flaking plaster, but the story clings to the walls like a ghost. It hums beneath your fingertips, a reminder that sometimes beauty kills slowest when it smiles the widest. So you linger in this room a moment longer, letting your eyes adjust to the dim corners where old seams peel back like the pages of a secret. Listen carefully, and you might hear the rustle of skirts, the soft sigh of a servant scrubbing at an impossible stain, the delicate scratch of a child's finger picking at the pattern. When you're ready, step lightly from these murmuring walls into the hidden corridors beyond, where servants faced dangers of their own in silence on staircases that groaned under secrets heavier than any bucket they carried. A hush falls over the back corridors, where footsteps echo softer than the grand parlors they serve. Here beyond the guests' polished view, servants slip through narrow passages that smell of damp wood coal dust and something sour that never quite fades. You stand at the base of a servant staircase, the kind that twists up the back of a house like a hidden artery. Its narrow steps creak beneath your weight, each groan a warning that these timbers have held more burdens than any drawing room chandelier ever did. Unlike the grand hallways, no one bothered to hide the drafts or seal the cracks here. Rot crept in through cellar doors and attic windows, soaking beams until they bent under the hush of secrets and scurrying mice. For the servants, danger was an accepted tenet, always present, always unspoken. Each day, they carried coal buckets up warped stairs that might give way with the wrong step. They polished arsenic-laced wallpapers until their fingers blistered lit gas lamps that hissed poison while they dusted. But wages were wages, and no maid dared complain too loudly when a cough lingered or the floor shifted underfoot. Surviving letters hint at how many young housemaids simply vanished from the ledgers, sickened by mold and fumes dismissed when they could no longer lift a tray. You run a hand along the wall, feeling the damp grit that never leaves these back halls. A century ago, a young scullery maid might have leaned here to catch her breath apron, strings damp from hauling water up too many flights. She'd know which step to skip to avoid a sudden crack, which beam moaned loudest during a storm. Her world was measured in rags coal scuttles, and whispered warnings passed from one girl to the next. In grand townhouses, servants moved like shadows unseen, but always expected. Their work kept the illusion alive. They mopped mildew from basement kitchens, where coal bins leaked black dust onto walls. They shivered in drafty attics, laying out gowns under low eaves, slick with winter frost. Their reward for this labor, a bowl of stew in the basement and a bed under a roof that might collapse if the timbers finally gave way. Owners rarely saw the secret rot that spread behind marble fireplaces and silk drapes. If they heard a floorboard snap beneath a maid's foot, they blamed clumsiness. If a butler keeled over from some mystery ailment, they called it weak nerves or gin, never the creeping mold that nested in the walls he dusted daily. Some household diaries hint at these hidden perils, tiny footnotes about staff dismissed without severance when they became unfit for service. Picture a footman balancing a heavy tea tray as he glides up these narrow stairs, careful not to let the teacups rattle. He knows better than to lean on the banister loose from decades of quiet rot. In winter, he might see his breath fog in the hallway, the damp air gathering in corners where fungi bloom unseen. Some families ordered fresh paint to cover the smell, but paint never stopped the damp. It only brightened the lie. There's a peculiar story of a grand house in Edinburgh where a section of the servant corridor caved in one spring night, swallowing a chambermaid as she carried linens upstairs. Her name slips through records like water through cracked beams, mentioned once in a ledger, her wages unpaid, her body never found whole. Historians argue over whether these accidents were rare tragedies or routine hazards politely ignored in genteel memoirs. Some old letters, whisper of servants sleeping on damp straw mattresses beneath leaky roofs, waking to coughs that turned to fevers. They didn't have the luxury of gas-lit bedrooms with thick quilts and velvet drapes, just thin blankets, moldy walls, and the constant draft of cold air slipping through warped window frames. In a world obsessed with appearances, these quiet workers absorbed the worst, so the drawing rooms could glow untroubled. Yet, they found ways to endure. A maid might prop a broom under a sagging beam, more talisman than support. A cook might send the youngest scullery boy to test a suspect stare before she risked her own ankle. They swapped stories and whispers where the floor buckled, which closet door stuck when the rains came. These tricks stitched a fragile safety net in a house that cared little if its hidden bones splintered beneath them. Some modern restorers, peeling back plaster and floorboards, find the traces left behind a half-rotted joist, propped with an old broom handle, scraps of newspaper stuffed into cracks to slow the draft. It's a testament to small acts of resistant servants patching what owners refuse to see. Historians love to romanticize the grandeur above stairs, yet the real survival story lives here in these back corridors, creaking under secrets. Stand still for a moment and listen. You might hear the hush of skirts, brushing damp walls, the sigh of boots on crooked steps, the low cough of someone trying not to wake the house as they carry coal up before dawn. There's a strange dignity in this hidden world, a testament to quiet resilience. Now imagine this same hidden path twisting up into the attics, where a careless leak might feed black mold that spreads down walls unseen. Or down into cellars where the musty air gathers in shallow pools beneath brass pipes that carry water nobody should really trust. For the servants, each bucket of water, each scrubbed floor, carried a threat soft creeping polite enough to kill slowly. So you step carefully now, feeling the boards bend under your foot, wondering whose weight bent them first. You brush your hand along the wall one last time, grateful you can leave when you choose. Ahead, the passage narrows, leading to another hidden peril, one that trickled through every tap, sparkling clear, but carrying a secret no amount of scrubbing could wash away. The hush of the servant corridor fades as you step into a small scullery, lined with brass taps and iron sinks, each promising clean water that was anything but. Here, the pipes gleam in the low light, well polished by generations of maids who trusted that what trickled from them was pure enough to brew tea wash hair or rinse a baby's bottle. But inside those bright pipes lurked another secret. Victorian water often came tainted straight from the source, carrying not only the grime of crowded cities, but also an invisible threat seeping through the very plumbing meant to protect the household. Lead, that pliable silvery metal, was a builder's dream in the 1800s. It bent easily, sealed tight, and cost less than brass. So, it coiled through walls and under floors, hidden in plain sight, poisoning drop by drop every family that poured a glass without question. You lift an imagined mug to your lips, now wondering how many polite sips turned into headaches, stomach pains, or worse. Back then, no one connected the strange taste of the water with the creeping sickness that left families bedridden for days. They blamed bad humors, spoiled milk, or the restless city air. The truth remains a matter of historical debate over how many Victorian ailments, mysterious cramps, stunted growth in children. The faint, ever-present malaise came not from scandal or sin, but from the clear water praised at every dinner table. Step closer to the tap and imagine a young maid filling kettles for breakfast tea. She might notice a chalky film clinging to the inside of the spout, or a faint metallic tang if she dared taste it straight. But the master wanted hot water at dawn, and no one paid her to wonder what lurked in the pipes. Some households trusted filters, clumsy contraptions stuffed with charcoal and sand, yet these could do little to catch the ghostly traces of lead that clung to every drop. Quacks ever eager to profit from polite panic sold water purifiers promising to cleanse away invisible threats. They looked impressive brass cylinders, fine mesh screens, intricate valves that gurgled reassuringly when turned. But they rarely worked as claimed. Some even shed more metal flakes into the flow, adding to the silent dose of poison that slipped into every teacup. Take a look at a typical Victorian breakfast scene. Fine china clinking eggs boiled just right, toast cut into neat triangles. Beside the master's elbow sits a glass of water, sparkling in the gaslight. He lifts it without thinking, confident that in this grand home, everything must be spotless, pure correct. He does not see the pipes under the floor, the flaking lead, solder, the slow drip that coats each mouthful in the ghost of sickness. Meanwhile, servants down below drink from the same pipes, sometimes worse. Old cellars were notorious for stagnant pools and seeping leaks that turned clean water foul before it reached the kitchen taps. The scullery maid stooped over a tin basin, might rinse dishes in water tinged with lead, her raw hands soaking for hours. The same water might wash a baby's blanket or fill the cook's stew pot. In these humble chores, poison found its patient path into every stomach that depended on these pipes. City planners of the time knew more than they admitted. Reports surfaced of entire neighborhoods suffering unexplained weakness of babies who failed to thrive of odd chalky deposits found in wells. Some engineers proposed costly replacements, iron pipes, new filters, fresh reservoirs far from factories and graveyards. But budgets were tight, and pipes that gleamed were easier to defend than digging up entire streets. Better to blame the air, the poor diet, or the moral failings of the working class than to accuse the plumbing that made the modern house so respectable. Historians argue whether this willful blindness was ignorance or convenience. Many journals from the era hint at engineers who knew the risk but buried the truth in bureaucratic reports that no one read, except maybe a housewife here or there, whose worries were quietly dismissed as hysteria. Even when London's grand new waterworks were unveiled, lead pipes still ran through countless walls, like veins keeping up the illusion of a clean, healthy household, while quietly sowing decay from within. A curious anecdote survives of a wealthy household that prided itself on its pure well in the garden. The lady of the house insisted that nothing soiled her family's drinking supply, but the same lead pipes carried that pure water indoors, winding past coal bins and under moldy floorboards. She died of a mysterious weakness at 43, her diaries filled with puzzled notes about constant headaches and a bitter taste in her mouth. The well stayed. So did the pipes. The poison simply outlived her. You stand now in the scullery hearing a ghostly drip echo from an unseen tap. Imagine the countless cups, kettles, and basins that passed beneath this pipe, each one carrying a trace of something no amount of polite conversation could wash away. It's almost poetic in a grim way. The more the Victorians scrubbed and polished their brass fittings, the more they clung to the thing that quietly betrayed them. If you listen carefully, you might hear the soft scrape of a maid's brush on copper kettles, the gentle hiss of water filling a basin for the master's shave. These ordinary sounds built a comforting rhythm that hid a dangerous truth. Sometimes progress isn't the hero of the story, but the hidden villain behind the wainscoting. Some modern restorers, prying open old walls, still find lengths of lead pipe gleaming dully in the dark, cold, silent testaments to a century's worth of polite poison. So you step away from the tap, now leaving behind the ghost of clean water that never was. Deeper in this house lie more secrets rooms, where stale air gathered unseen hidden chambers that trapped fumes so dense they turned dreams to nightmares. Follow me there next, where we'll find closets and crawl spaces that hid more than lost boots and forgotten brooms. They hid breathless hours that no polite guest ever imagined as they sipped their tea. You slip from the scullery into a narrow back hallway, the air thick with the hush of secrets. Here, beneath the polished floors and gilt mirrors upstairs, lies a hidden world of crawl spaces, cupboards, and cramped closets that few guests ever knew existed. These tight spaces breathed for the house, or rather, they gathered the breaths no one wanted to claim. Pause by a panel door set low into the wall. Its brass knob is worn smooth by invisible hands, servants, repairmen, children sneaking into forbidden nooks. Push it open and peer inside a low crawl space dusty and damp, lined with old beams furred in cobwebs. In this shallow darkness, gas fumes and coal smoke once gathered pooling in the corners, where fresh air rarely dared to wander. Victorians adored secret storage, beneath staircases, under eaves, behind false panels, closets multiplied like quiet conspirators. Some hid valuables, some hid skeletons of another kind, stale air coal gas that slipped through cracks, mold that crept up from damp foundations. The grand parlors above might glow warm and golden, but the bones of the house pulsed with stale breath. No window could open wide enough to cure. Imagine a maid squeezed into this crawl space tasked with retrieving extra candles or hidden silver during a grand party. Her lantern flickers against low beams. She coughs. Maybe she thinks it's the dust. She doesn't know that trapped air, heavy with carbon monoxide from the pipes and gas jets above, has no escape except through her lungs. Historians love to point out how these hidden gaps turned whole houses into accidental gas chambers when fires or lamps leaked. A single faulty pipe could seep invisible fumes under the floorboards, drifting through mouse holes and tiny splits in the lath. In grand townhouses, the family never noticed until the sickness came, headaches, dizziness, a slow, drifting sleep that sometimes didn't end. But down here, servants often felt it first and knew better than to mention it too loudly. There's a curious detail in a handful of old builders' notes, scribbled lines about ventilating apertures that rarely got built. Victorian architects loved ventilation in theory, praising bracing drafts and healthy cross breezes in the front rooms. But crawl spaces, closets, coal bins, they stayed shut tight to keep in the warmth, trapping stale air like a whispered confession between the walls. Some homeowners grew suspicious after too many fainting fits. They hired inventors who promised mechanical wonders, elaborate fans, gas detectors, or charlatan machines that whirred impressively, but did little more than move stale air from one hidden pocket to another. Quacks sold ozone bottles to freshen cupboards, little more than scented water dribbled into corners. Yet the poison stayed nesting in the dark, where polite conversation never reached. Picture a nursery above warm and bright in the morning sun. A new baby, dozing, while Nanny tidies away laundry. Beneath her feet, these crawl spaces exhaled gases that rose through cracks in the boards. The tiny lungs above never stood a chance. Doctors blind to the danger diagnosed weak constitutions, poor breeding, or nerves. Some historians argue this quiet betrayal did more to shape Victorian mortality than any epidemic. You duck your head inside the cramped gap. The air feels close, the smell stale, with a trace of damp wood and forgotten cloth. Here and there, scraps of old wallpaper cling to rough beams, tiny ghosts of the elegant rooms above. A broken broom lies across a beam, a makeshift prop to hold a pipe, steady perhaps placed there by a long-gone servant, hoping to stop a leak no one wanted to see. A soft laugh echoes in your mind at the idea that the grandest houses were often the deadliest. Builders hid these cramped guts behind flawless plaster and polished oak like a corpse dressed for the finest wake. They sold the dream of modern living gaslight-piped water, indoor warmth, while the hidden places beneath whispered their own story, if only someone had listened. One old story tells of a London townhouse that sat empty for years, rumored to be haunted after a series of fainting deaths. Inspectors finally crept beneath its floorboards to find crawl spaces thick with coal gas pooled there from a single cracked pipe feeding the dining room chandelier. The grand table above had hosted so many dinner parties under its soft glow, each course served with a side of invisible poison. It's easy to romanticize these hidden spaces now. But to the staff who crept through them, they were not quaint secrets. They were traps that took your breath and sometimes never gave it back. A misplaced lantern could ignite the stale air with a soft boom that left only charred beams for the master to explain away. Some curious souls tried to map these gaps. Builders' apprentices scribbled rough diagrams of ducts and voids on scraps of parchment tucked into joists, where modern restorers sometimes find them stained with soot and secrets. Scholars today puzzle over these scribbles like archaeologists decoding buried tombs, maps of poison tunnels hidden beneath silk drapes and crystal decanters. You crawl back out now, brushing dust from your hands. The closet door clicks shut behind you, a soft thud that sounds oddly final. Breathe deep, glad your lungs draw only stale air and not the invisible ghosts that lingered here a century ago. Step lightly through the passage ahead, where a faded carpet muffles your steps. Imagine the servants who once hurried down this same hallway, balancing trays of coal candles, linens, careful not to linger too long where the fumes gathered thickest. They knew which doors to wedge open a crack, which windows to unhook when the master wasn't looking. Small rebellions in the name of fresh breath. It's strangely comforting to stand here and listen for the house's secret heartbeat, the hiss of hidden pipes, the sigh of old timbers shifting in the dark. These hidden rooms never cared who lived above them. Gilded guests or silent staff, all breathed the same stale air in the end. When you're ready, step beyond this hush. Ahead waits a drawing room that glows with the warmth of candles and coal fires. But even there, the promise of comfort carries its own quiet threat, a suffocating blend of soot and carbon weaving through carpets and velvet drapes. Follow me onward, where soft flames promise warmth, yet slip poison into every breath. A warm hush greets you as you step out of the hidden crawl space and into a drawing room awash in the flicker of candles and the steady glow of a coal fire. At first glance, it feels like the safest place in the house, bright, inviting, softly perfumed with beeswax and the faint sweetness of burning coal. It's the heart of a Victorian evening slippers warmed by the hearth, thick carpets, underfoot velvet drapes, drawn tight against the chill beyond the glass. But linger a little longer, and you'll notice the air feels heavier here, thicker, with an edge of soot that clings to the back of your throat. It's a truth too many polite families ignored. The cozy warmth of candles, coal, and plush furnishings hid yet another threat, one that settled silently in lungs and curtains alike. Imagine a dozen candles burning along the mantel, their flames dancing in polished mirrors that double their glow. Each wick is a tiny factory of carbon spooling invisible threads into the air. Coal smolders in the grate, its red heart flickering bright and deceptive, sending curls of smoke up the chimney, most of it anyway. Some of that smoke slides back into the room when the flue sticks, mixing with the warm air, until the guests grow drowsy, eyes watering heads, nodding in time with the clock's steady tick. A curious fact you might appreciate: many Victorian houses boasted about their thick carpets and heavy drapes as signs of wealth. The more plush and layered a parlor was, the higher the family's standing, yet all those fabrics trapped soot and carbon with the devotion of a sponge. Each plush rug under your feet hides fine black dust waiting to stir with every step. A simple sweep of the skirts, a passing breeze from a slammed door, and the particles rise again, drawn into lungs with every polite breath. You run your palm along the back of an armchair, imagining the layer of fine grit gathering along seams and folds. The lady of the house might send her maid to beat the carpets each week, shaking clouds of black into the garden air. But inside, the cycle never stopped. Soot settled again by dusk, weaving its slow, suffocating tapestry among the damask and tassels. Historians argue over letters from the era complaining of heavy air and unexplained weakness in rooms deemed spotless by the standards of the day. At the center of it all, the coal fire whispers warmth. Coal was modernity's darling, cheap, abundant, and powerful enough to banish the damp chill that crept into English bones each winter. But each glowing ember fed a silent fog, drifting up the chimney if the wind allowed, or curling back through cracks in the flue if it didn't. A well-sealed room, a roaring fire, and a tightly shut window turned this lovely parlor into a chamber of slow suffocation. There's a peculiar detail in old housekeeping manuals. They recommend cracking a window to sweeten the air when the fire roared too hot. But few hosts wanted a chill draft ruffling hair or lifting doilies from the side tables. Better to keep the windows closed and the conversation warm, no matter how heavy the heads grew, after an evening of brandy and soft laughter. Some doctors blamed the inevitable headaches on overexcitement or weakness of the nerves. Few cared to suspect the flickering coals and gentle candles were the true culprits. Picture a servant tending this fire late at night, shoveling coal from the scuttle while trying not to cough too loudly. She knows to keep the flue handle open, to listen for the telltale backdraft when the wind shifts. If she slips, if she forgets just once to wedge the flue, she risks more than a chill draft. Some household diaries hint at tragedies that never made the gossip columns, whole families drifting off to sleep in warm parlors, never to wake again. A quirk of Victorian science, some well-meaning inventors claimed they could conquer the soot with clever carpet designs. They sold dustless rugs and fancy foot scrapers promising to trap every particle. Of course, none of it worked for long. The coal found its way, and the candles smoked when the wick burned too low, and the plush fabrics welcomed it all like old friends. Surviving letters hint at whether the era's great love for heavy decor was fashion or simply a convenient place for filth to hide. You can almost see the scene: a family gathered around the hearth, mother mending a cuff by candlelight, father reading aloud from the day's paper, children sprawled on the carpet, tracing patterns in the pile. Each breath they draw carries a little more carbon. Each laugh drifts through a haze so thin they never notice. And the house, so warm and polite, keeps its secret tucked beneath the rugs and drapery folds. Modern restorers peel back these layers like pages in a ghost story. Beneath old carpets, they find fine black residue pressed deep into floorboards, evidence of evenings just like this one repeated 1,000 times. Some debate whether the real danger was the fire's exhaust or the candle's slow exhale. Either way, the carbon lingered long after the last ember died. Stand here for a moment and let your eyes drift shut. Feel the warmth on your cheeks, the soft weight of the air pressing against your ribs. This parlor, so gentle in its glow, hums with an old lesson. Comfort often comes with a hidden cost. The more the Victorians sealed themselves in for warmth, the closer they invited the hush of suffocation. Step closer to the hearth now. Imagine the brass tools arranged neatly, the poker, the shovel, the delicate brush, to sweep stray ash from the marble hearth. Each handled by the same unseen hands that knew to listen for the faint whistle of gas in the walls, the sigh of soot curling back when the wind turned foul. Servants carried these secrets in quiet glances, adjusting windows a crack, when the master looked away, hoping a small draft might keep the family breathing through the night. So you stand in this gentle gilded suffocation and trace your finger through a phantom layer of soot on the mantel. Even here, beneath the hush of polite conversation and flickering candlelight, the house sighs its secret poison into every breath. When you're ready, let's slip away from this parlor's warmth. Follow me into the nursery at the top of the stairs, a room dressed in soft colors and gentle dreams, yet more perilous than any back corridor or flickering gas lamp could ever whisper. At the top of a narrow, creaking staircase sits the nursery, a quiet sanctuary, dressed in pastel wallpapers and gauzy drapes, a cradle of innocence that promised safety to the tiniest Victorians. But even here, behind lace curtains and painted wooden toys, the house kept its deadliest secrets. Push the nursery door open gently. The air is warmer than the rooms below, thick with the sweetness of milk soap and a faint chemical edge powders and tonics tucked neatly on a high shelf. A bassinet stands near the window, its quilt stitched with tiny roses, the pillow embroidered with a name you'll never read in a history book. Here, everything looks soft, clean, perfect, until you remember what's in the walls, the floors, the air itself. For well-to-do families, the nursery was a badge of status. Bright wallpapers, often the fashionable arsenic-laced greens and blues, promised cheer in gray London winters. Heavy drapes trapped the warmth so the baby wouldn't catch a chill. But every pretty touch turned the nursery into a sealed box where invisible poisons pooled unnoticed. Picture a nanny bending over the cradle, adjusting a pillow, whispering a lullaby that drifts into the thick hush of stale air. She knows to keep the window closed tight in winter. Victorian wisdom said drafts killed babies faster than anything. But with every candle flame, every coal fire in the tiny grate, the air grows heavier. Carbon monoxide slips beneath the door and lingers just above the cradle, mixing with arsenic dust that peels from the pastel walls. Doctors puzzled endlessly over the high infant mortality that haunted even the wealthiest houses. They blamed mothers for weak milk, blamed cold weather, blamed spirits and frail blood. Few suspected the warm, stuffy nurseries wrapped so tight against the chill that fresh air barely dared slip in. Scholars still puzzle over whether ignorance alone killed so many infants, or whether polite society simply couldn't bear to look its own comfort in the eye. Step closer to the cradle and imagine the soft creak as a baby shifts in sleep. A single candle burns on a side table. Its flame flickers in the draught that shouldn't exist. Servants sometimes crack the door at night when the mistress wasn't looking, hoping a sliver of clean air might drift inside. Many nannies learn to trust their instincts more than their employer's strict orders. Some even left windows ajar in defiance, risking scolding to save a child's breath. You run your hand over the carved crib rail, picturing a mother's pride as she shows it off to friends at tea. See the new silk drapes, imported. The wallpaper, Paris green, so fresh and bright. She can't smell the faint sweetness of poison drifting around her baby's dreams. Or perhaps she does, and blames the nursery maid for not dusting enough. There's an old household manual that survives from the mid-1800s, its pages yellowed and brittle. It boasts about the perfect nursery, airtight windows, thick carpets to muffle cold floors, and plenty of gaslight to keep mothers from fumbling in the dark. Modern eyes read those same pages and see a recipe for quiet tragedy, an innocent room turned lethal with the best intentions. Picture this nursery again in winter. The coal grate glows, faintly candles flicker. A baby fusses, a nanny shushes and hums. The soft blanket rises and falls, each breath, drawing in a cocktail of soot carbon and arsenic. Some children survived, of course many didn't. And the blame for their tiny gravestones was rarely laid at the feet of the fine houses that sealed them in so gently. One peculiar detail sometimes found in old diaries is the superstition of night air. Victorian mothers feared it bitterly. Better to keep a room stuffy and hot than risk the chill they believed carried death. The irony, of course, was that the real killer was already waiting woven into the wallpaper, hidden in the flickering flame, clinging to curtains that held stale air like a secret. Some quacks peddled solutions for nursery ill humors. Potions, scented sachets, special wallpapers they claimed were arsenic-free. Most were snake oil, sold with fancy labels and empty promises. Meanwhile, quiet nannies and worried maids did what they could. A cracked window, a door left ajar, a whispered prayer that the baby's lungs might last the night. Modern restorers sometimes find these nurseries frozen in time. Beneath layers of paint lie stripes of the deadly greens and blues that once brightened these rooms. They scrape it away, wearing masks and gloves, protection the children who slept here never had. Historians piece together the silent stories. High birth rates, high funerals grieving parents who never guessed their love of fashion helped shape the gravestones they visited. Stand still for a moment. Imagine the hush of this nursery at dawn before the house stirs. The faint crackle of the coal in the grate, the soft breath of a sleeping child, the watchful nanny half dozing in her chair. The poison curls unseen through the heavy air, wrapping itself around dreams that never grow old enough to leave this cradle. When you're ready, step lightly from this room. Ahead, ferns and palms wait in polished brass pots, an optimistic line of defense Victorians clung to when they finally began to suspect their beautiful homes might be trying to kill them. Let's see how those fragile green leaves stood guard against a poison that cared nothing for polite society's best intentions. Past the nursery's soft cradle and hushed breath, you drift into a brighter corner of the Victorian home, one where hope takes root in slender fronds and waxy leaves. Here, houseplants stand in polished brass pots, and delicate clay urns lined up like an emerald army poised to defend their keepers from the air they could not see. Pause by a window where a Boston fern spills over its stand, its fronds trembling in the draft that slips through cracked putty and old glass. In the 19th century, houseplants weren't mere decoration. They were talismans against the creeping dread of stale poisoned air. The more families whispered about gaslight headaches and suffocating coal fumes, the more they filled drawing rooms and parlors with palms, ferns, and trailing ivy. There's a curious irony here. The same society that sealed windows tight to keep out deadly night air turned to these fragile green lungs for salvation. Ferns became a fashion statement and a quiet confession, an admission that maybe, just maybe, the walls and flames and pipes weren't as pure as the polished silver and lace doilies claimed. Picture a hostess boasting of her thriving parlor palm to guests gathered around the fireplace. She praises its soft fronds, the delicate curve of each leaflet, the freshness it lends to a room weighed down by velvet drapes and flickering lamps. She has no idea that the fern can only do so much, its roots pulling in stale carbon dioxide, its leaves dusted daily by a maid who hopes the faint green scent might mask the coal smoke clinging to her apron. Servants bore the burden of this green optimism too. They hauled buckets from the basement cisterns, watered pots balanced on high windowsills, dusted each frond with a damp cloth so no visitor would see a drooping stem or a yellowed edge. In grand houses, whole conservatories bloomed tiled sunrooms bursting with palms and ferns that promised clean air and social standing in the same breath. The truth remains a matter of historical debate how much good these living guardians actually did. Some argue that the ferns absorbed trace toxins, offering modest relief from coal smoke and gas leaks. Others scoff that the plants were more a moral comfort than a practical shield, like hanging a single umbrella in a hurricane and hoping it keeps you dry. One overlooked detail: many houseplants came from far-off colonies, carried across seas in humid crates. Victorian journals brim with instructions on how to keep these delicate foreigners alive in the damp gray light of England's winters. Whole magazines devoted pages to the best ferns for purifying drawing rooms, the finest palms for filtering the nursery's air. The truth: no frond could match the creeping fog of carbon monoxide or the steady trickle of arsenic dust. Picture a weary maid cracking open a parlor window when the mistress isn't watching, hoping the ferns won't have to stand alone. Maybe she believes the trailing ivy above the mantel can swallow a whisper of the poison. Maybe she trusts the sun will do its part, even on short, pale afternoons when the coals burn hottest and the lamps glow late into the night. A curious anecdote survives of a fashionable London couple who filled their city townhouse with exotic palms. Guests marveled at the lush foliage spilling from every alcove, proof of taste and forward thinking. Yet diaries hint that the family suffered constant headaches and a peculiar metallic taste they blamed on the city air. The palms stayed. So did the headaches. The truth lay buried in the gas pipes and coal scuttles they refused to abandon for fear of drafts and darkness. You run your fingertips over a fern's feathered leaf, imagining the care that went into this living ornament. A symbol of purity, helpless against the tide of smoke that curled from every chimney and candle wick. In the end, the plants offered more comfort than cure, a quiet promise that beauty could still thrive in rooms heavy with invisible ghosts. Modern eyes might see these parlor jungles as charming quirks of an era that prized beauty over safety. But for Victorians, they were small acts of resistance, tiny living lungs pressed against sealed windows and locked doors. Servants fussed over each pot, hoping a healthy fern meant a healthy family. that bright leaves meant fresh air, when the walls whispered otherwise. Today, restorers sometimes find traces of these green guardians in forgotten corners, dried root balls hidden in cracked pots, brass plant stands tarnished and crooked. They read these relics like a footnote to the polished woodwork and faded wallpapers, a reminder that even the most stylish houses needed something alive to stand guard. So pause here among the parlor's green company. Watch the sunlight slip through dusty glass to kiss each frond. Imagine the soft hope that drifted with every leaf's slow breath. The house, for all its poison, carried these small green lungs like a promised life growing quietly, where polite conversation dared not linger too long. When you're ready, let's step from this quiet jungle to a livelier scene, a grand dinner party where laughter rises with the clink of crystal. But the same gas and coal that warms the guests drifts among them as a silent, invisible guest of its own. Step softly now into a room brimming with warmth and polite laughter, a grand dining hall aglow with gaslight and candle flames, where the fine clink of crystal and polite murmurs drown out any whisper of what drifts unseen among the guests. Here coal fires roar in twin hearths at either end, pushing back the night's chill, with a steady stream of smoke that doesn't always find its way up the chimney. Picture the table, a gleaming stretch of polished oak, draped in white linen, heavy with porcelain dishes and silver cutlery that catches the flicker of 10 candles dancing overhead. Guests lean in close cheeks, flushed with wine and soft gossip. They laugh about the weather, the latest scandal in the papers, the fortunes they claim will last forever. None notice how the air grows heavier with each course, how the warmth carries more than comfort. Beneath the clatter of forks and the hush of satin gowns brushing against chairs, the real guests of honor swirl silently, fumes from the coal grate, carbon from the candles, a faint hiss from a gas sconce that leaks just enough to stain the room's hush with an invisible fog. To your nose, it's a trace of sweet, stale warmth, nothing more sinister than the hearty smell of roast and pudding. But your lungs know better. Victorians adored these dinner parties. They were proof of success evidence that a family had mated enough servants to fuss behind doors, enough candles to banish the dark, enough coal to stoke the fire until dawn if needed. Guests would drink late into the night, oblivious to the fact that each toast carried a silent cost. A headache blamed on too much claret, a fainting spell politely hushed as poor nerves. Historians still argue whether these excuses were ignorance or willful blindness to the hush of poison drifting past crystal goblets. Servants moved like ghosts behind the laughter, topping up wine glasses, removing platters tending the hearth to keep flames bright and polite conversation warmer still. They knew the flues didn't always draw cleanly, that a shift in the wind could blow a soft cough of soot back into the room. A good footman cracked a window by an inch when he dared, hoping the draft might slip out the staleness before a mistress noticed the chill. One curious detail surfaces in old dinner diaries. Polite homes stocked extra lavender sachets for these evenings. Guests tucked them in handkerchiefs or pressed them to their temples, convinced the heavy air was simply the burden of fine society. The real cause, coal smoke drifting back, gaslight burning dirty, stayed politely unmentioned. Who would spoil a good pudding by pointing out the flickering flame above their heads might be slowly draining the room of air? Imagine the hush after dessert plates, cleared, glasses, refilled the host, lifting a final toast as the room shimmers with soft candlelight. If you listen closely, you can almost hear the crackle of the coal and the faint hiss of gas jets hidden behind the chandelier's polished arms. The guests lean back in their chairs, full and sleepy, never suspecting they're drifting off beneath an invisible veil of fumes that clings to every heavy drape. Historians find hints of these quiet dangers in letters, mentions of dinner guests who took ill after a long evening of sudden fainting fits swept under the rug. Some households blamed oysters gone bad or wine poured too freely. The truth lingered instead in the stale hush left behind when the last guest slipped into the night air, grateful for a breath of clean wind to shake off the hush they couldn't name. Step around the table now. See the high windows misted with condensation, the drapes drawn tight against the night. Imagine the layer of soot gathering where no hand can reach, along crown moldings, behind portraits, inside velvet folds. Servants might sweep and polish until the brass gleamed, but the air kept its secrets close. One dinner tale that survived the gossip pages tells of a grand city townhouse where the host, desperate to show off new gas chandeliers, ordered them lit all night. No candles, no oil lamps, only gaslight for modern splendor. By dawn, guests had stumbled out pale and reeling. Some blamed too much champagne. Only later did rumors swirl of a leaking pipe behind the plaster, one polite leak that turned a bright night's laughter into a hush of headaches that lingered for days. Yet even when they knew the risks, few families gave up the glow. Gaslight meant modernity, meant luxury, meant a house that sparkled long after dusk, turned city streets to soot. A few cracked windows, a discreet servant with a draft stopper, and the dinner parties continued breath by breath, toast by toast. You pause at the hearth, now feeling the faint warmth against your palms. A half-burnt log settles with a sigh, sending a puff of invisible smoke into the hush. The guests don't notice. The host laughs too loudly. The soft scrape of a maid's shoes against the floorboards is the only clue that someone watches the air while the rest watch each other. So take one last look at this polite scene, crystal gleaming laughter rising the hush of poison, drifting among the polite silences. When you're ready, step through the service door at the back, where the hush grows sharper still. There doctors wait to dismiss every cough as weak nerves, every faint as a lady's whim, never daring to see the household poisons, drifting quietly through the walls they so carefully built, slip away from the lingering warmth of the dinner party and follow the hush down a narrow hallway where polite chatter can't reach. Here, in a study lined with heavy books and the sharp smell of tinctures and tonics, the family physician leans in, brows furrowed over a patient's pale face. The hush here is different, more clinical, more convenient. After all, what polite family wants to hear, that their lovely home might be the cause of their mysterious ailments. Imagine a Victorian doctor, mustache-trimmed coat impeccably pressed, peering through pince-nez glasses at a woman who's been fainting for weeks. He listens, nods, prescribes a tonic, likely a syrup of alcohol herbs, maybe a dash of opium for good measure. The words, household poison, never cross his lips. Instead, he writes it down in the patient's book: weak nerves, delicate temperament, hysteria, melancholia. These tidy phrases became the wallpaper for countless lives slowly undone by arsenic dust, carbon monoxide, coal soot, and stale trapped air. Doctors blamed the body for what the house did. They blamed mothers for weak milk when babies wasted away in pastel nurseries. They blamed the poor for degenerate blood when they coughed themselves into early graves. All the while the gas lights hissed and the coal fires whispered their soft poison into each patient's breath. Step closer and picture a woman perched on the study's fainting couch, corset loosened just enough to let her breathe, but never enough to truly draw a clean lungful. She explains her dizzy spells, the tightness in her chest, the headaches that bloom like clockwork when the lamps are lit. Her husband stands nearby, arms crossed, ready to nod gravely when the doctor confirms it's her nerves, her constitution, her weakness. Never the wallpaper that peels green flakes behind her head. Never the gas sconce that leaks sweet fumes all night. Historians debate whether these physicians truly didn't know or chose not to know. Some medical journals of the day hint that a few suspected coal smoke bad pipes and arsenic paint. But suspicion was no match for polite society's insistence that illness must come from within, never from the drawing room's tasteful moldings. There's a curious irony in the remedies they offered. Many families brought in ozone machines that promised to freshen the air, crackling and humming in dark corners. Some doctors swore by daily cold baths to shock the bad humors away, never mind that the same pipes that fed the bath carried lead straight into the tub. Housewives were instructed to keep busy, to ward off melancholy, dusting arsenic wallpaper, beating soot from carpets, airing rooms that no window latch would fully open. Imagine the family doctor scribbling his prescription laudanum for the mother cod liver oil, for the children rest and fresh air, though not too much, for fear of night drafts. He leaves behind a hush heavier than the one he found. The family returns to their rooms, lights the lamps, stirs the fire. The poison drifts on. One peculiar footnote from an old physician's journal tells of a grand house whose entire staff suffered from coughs that never healed. The master called the doctor again and again, but the diagnosis never changed. Poor hygiene, poor diet, poor breeding. No one checked the hidden rooms where mold bloomed behind mahogany panels, where gas pipes hissed behind portraits of ancestors who'd built the very wealth that made this polite death possible. Servants learned to keep their complaints to themselves. A housemaid with a cough risked dismissal. No pension, no gentle retirement in the country. Just a quiet fade into the shadows of the workhouses. The house might kill her slowly, but speaking up could kill her livelihood overnight. So they coughed behind kitchen doors, took comfort in half-whispered advice. Crack the window when you polish the gas sconces. Scrub the mildew when no one's looking. Small acts of defiance against the hush that pinned blame to the body and never the building. Modern historians love to puzzle over these old diagnoses. They read the faint handwriting, hysteria, neurasthenia, melancholia, and see the hidden truths beneath the polite labels. They dig through forgotten letters, diaries, builders' notes, piecing together the quiet truth. The very houses that promised safety and comfort quietly siphoned life from the lungs that trusted them most. Stand here now, in this quiet study, lined with medical tomes and polite delusions. Run your hand over the spines of old books that promised cures, but never questioned the cause. Feel the hush that lingers in the heavy air, the ghost of too many quiet nods and scribbled notes that never once pointed a finger at the poison woven into plaster pipes, flames, and carpets. When you're ready, slip out through the doctor's door. Ahead, wait the quack inventors and snake oil saviors men who promised miracles in brass cylinders and sparkling glass tubes, all to cleanse the very poison they helped pipe into polite parlors and fainting rooms. Let's meet them next, these gentle tricksters who sold false hope to households desperate to breathe easy in walls that never would. Step out of the hush of the doctor's study and wander into the cluttered workshop of a Victorian dreamer, part inventor, part salesman, part showman. Here the scent of polished brass and machine oil mixes with stale air thickened by too many promises. Shelves sag under curious contraptions, tin cylinders, whirring fans, delicate glass tubes bubbling with colored liquids that look more magical than medicinal. Meet the quack inventors, gentle tricksters in frock coats who saw profit in the fear polite families barely spoke aloud. If the walls whispered poison and the doctor muttered about nerves, these men offered certainty: a brass box that claimed to purify the air, a bubbling lamp that cleansed gaslight of its hidden fumes, a portable fan that spun a fresh breeze through rooms where no window dared open wide. You stand before a gleaming contraption, part pump, part ornament. Its label boasts guaranteed to expel bad vapors and improve the nerves. The well-to-do might buy 3 for the drawing room, the nursery, and the bedroom, each humming faintly beside flickering gas lights that hiss poison all the same. Servants dust these marvels daily, careful not to question why the headaches linger and the coughs persist. Some inventors truly believed in their miracles. They tinkered late into candlelit nights, convinced the right filter or fan might beat back coal smoke and stale gas. Others knew better, polite con men who toured city neighborhoods with a van of polished gadgets and pamphlets promising salvation at a price just high enough to keep the story believable. Surviving letters hint at how many meant well, and how many simply lined their pockets with each desperate household's fear. Picture a dinner party guest bragging about the family's new air-scrubbing device, a squat iron stove that puffs steam and scents the air with lavender. Never mind that it sits beside the coal grate, its steam mixing with soot and smoke in a quiet dance. The hush of poison doesn't care how much polished brass surrounds it. One curious detail in old advertisements: many claimed their devices used ozone to cleanse the home. Few Victorians knew what ozone was, but the word sounded modern scientific, just foreign enough to reassure. Bottled ozone powdered ozone fans that claimed to spin ozone through damp parlors and stale nurseries. In truth, these gadgets did little more than churn stale air from corner to corner, sometimes adding moisture that made mold bloom faster in hidden closets. Servants quickly learned which machines hummed harmlessly and which hissed suspicious fumes of their own. Some quack devices used burning chemicals to neutralize bad air, replacing coal smoke with acrid scents that bit at the nose but reassured worried hosts. A maid might crack a window behind her mistress's back, hoping the real breeze might undo what the contraption could not. These inventors loved spectacle. Traveling salesmen staged demonstrations in city squares, glass boxes filled with smoke, then cleared with a flourish by hidden pumps. Curious crowds watched, clapped bought shares in companies that dissolved the next winter when debts outweighed promises. Some pamphlets survived their pages yellow and brittle, boasting cures for household vapors, industrial mists, ladies' fainting fits. Each gadget glimmers in the sketches: brass dials, ornate levers, fancy valves, while the fine print warns to keep away from children and pets. Modern historians trace these gadgets in museum drawers: twisted coils of copper, rusted iron fans, decorative grills meant to impress more than protect. Some worked a little, most did nothing at all, but the belief was half the cure. Better to polish a shiny cylinder than face the fact that the very walls and lamps and carpets were the problem polite society refused to name. Step closer to a half-finished machine, On the inventor's bench, glass tubes loop through a brass drum. A candle flickers below a bubbling flask. Its promise to burn impurities from gaslight before the flame reaches the room. A clever trick, except the candle itself adds its own soft veil of carbon to the parlor hush. The master of the house brags of his new sanitary lamp, while servants still crack windows when backs are turned. One inventor, more honest than most, famously admitted that fresh air was the only real cure for a suffocating home. He published a single pamphlet warning families to open their windows, clear the crawl spaces, and trust less in gadgets and more in drafts. His competitors laughed him out of business. What profit was there in telling people to trust the wind for free? Servants traded stories of which gadgets worked and which made the air worse. They tucked lavender under aprons, wedged doors ajar when they could polish brass vents that rarely vented at all. Small rebellions against the polite poison that slipped past every polished promise. So stand here a moment longer in this cluttered shop of half hope and soft deceit. Listen to the hiss of the flame beneath the glass, the gentle clink of brass parts that never truly fixed what the walls refused to confess. When you're ready, slip past these glittering distractions. Ahead lies the true reason these poisons lingered so long, legal loopholes wide enough to swallow generations building codes that looked the other way, while the quiet hush turned lovely homes into hidden tombs. Let's follow the hush behind the laws next and see how the beauty stayed standing while the breath inside it slipped away. Step away from the cluttered shelves of half-working gadgets and slip into a quieter corner of the story, one built not of brass and bubbling flasks, but of ink signatures and polite indifference carved into the law. Here the hush doesn't drift from candles or crawl through pipes. It waits in loopholes wide enough to swallow families whole. Picture a grand Victorian street, terraced houses with gleaming facades, marble steps scrubbed daily by maids whose names never appear in city records. Behind each polished door, secrets gather like damp behind wallpaper. Builders knew the shortcuts, well cheaper timbers hidden behind mahogany panels, gas pipes laid without proper seals, drainage systems that carried filth too close to drinking water. And the law, it trailed behind, always polite, always too slow to see what truly drifted behind brick and plaster. You stand in the office of a building inspector, his desk buried under ledgers and letters from families begging for help. A neighbor's wall has buckled to cellar floods every spring. Strange smells creep through cracks where coal gas shouldn't flow. He dips his pen, scratches a note, but his hands are tied by the ink of old codes that favor profit over protection. Some cities passed rules for safer pipes, stronger timbers, better ventilation, but enforcing them cost money and made rich men grumble. Better to let a polite hush settle over the gaps. If a grand home collapsed or poisoned its family newspapers, blame the weather, bad luck, careless servants. Rarely did they mention the builder who cut corners or the council that looked away. One curious footnote in London's building history: inspectors who pushed too hard were quietly retired. A few left behind diaries, fragments historians piece together now. In those pages, they sketched plans for homes they never approved, scribbled notes on damp crawl spaces, cracked joists, pipes that hissed sweet poison behind ballroom walls. They knew the hush wasn't an accident, it was a quiet trade between elegance and neglect. Imagine a proud homeowner pacing a marble foyer showing off gas lights to dinner guests. He trusts the polished brass, never asks how well the pipes were sealed in the crawl space beneath. He boasts of a coal fire that burns all night, ignoring the flue's crack that leaks soot into the walls. He has no reason to worry. The law protects his wealth more than his breath. Servants knew the loopholes better than most. They whispered about the cellar beams that sagged under damp barrels, the wall cracks stuffed with rags to keep the draft out. They mopped mildew from basement kitchens where no inspector ever stepped. If they spoke up, they risked their place in the house and no place at all beyond it. A peculiar truth about the Victorian boom: entire streets rose overnight to house new money. Rows of terraced homes looked identical from the street, polite symmetry masking uneven foundations, cheap bricks hidden behind stone facades. Some walls bowed within a decade, floorboards sank. Gas leaks hissed in hushes no dinner party ever heard until it was too late. The truth remains a matter of historical debate, whether these shortcuts were ignorance or quiet calculation. Builders knew time was money. If a family discovered rot in the joists or mold behind the nursery wall, repairs cost less than honest materials would have in the first place. Better to patch and paper over the hush than dig it out at the root. Stand in this quiet corridor of polite fraud and imagine the owners who never asked questions. A crack sealed with fresh plaster. A suspicious draft explained away as a harmless quirk. Some families moved house every few years, the polite rot left behind for someone else to inherit. A beautiful tomb wrapped in fresh paint. When the worst happened, when a house collapsed on a quiet afternoon, or an entire family never woke from sleep, coroners often blamed fate. The weather, a servant's mistake, a faulty stove. Never the loophole that allowed builders to skimp on bricks or hide a gas pipe where no one would ever look. Legal reform came slowly, only after too many polite tombs turned scandalous enough to make headlines. One London tabloid famously exposed a row of model homes built with rotten beams. Their facades gleamed for wealthy buyers, but rain dripped through the attic, mold crept down stairwells. Coal gas hissed behind gaslit drawing rooms. The scandal sold papers for weeks. Builders promised reforms. Inspectors tightened their ledgers. And still behind closed doors, the hush found new corners to settle in. Step lightly through this ghost of polite neglect. Feel the air drift through walls that look solid but hide soft timber and whispered mold. Listen for the hush in old joists that never should have held so much weight. The law closed loopholes one by one, but the hush lingered behind new paint, and polite lies, always patient, always ready to drift back in when no one was looking. When you're ready, follow me down the hall to the parlors and drawing rooms where these secrets finally spilled into the open. Scandals and tabloid whispers that dragged polite death into the daylight stories of houses that looked like dreams and crumbled like rotten paper when the truth pushed too hard. Let's see what happened when the hush learned it couldn't stay hidden forever. Slip through the creaking hallway and find yourself back in the parlor. But this time the hush is gone, cracked wide open by scandals that refuse to stay behind polite drapes. Here, the gaslight flickers on faces pale with gossip, the hush replaced by a buzz of whispered horror. Grand homes, rotting timbers, poisoned air secrets too large to smother under fresh wallpaper. Picture a newspaper boy on a rain-slick London street, crying headlines that make matrons clutch their shawls tighter. Mayfair Mansion, a death trap, arsenic in the wallpaper, gas leaks blamed for sudden passing. Stories that once flickered through back corridors now spilled onto breakfast tables and drawing rooms, forcing polite society to glance then stare at the hidden rot they'd pretended not to hear. Imagine a hostess, frozen mid-pour, at tea, when a guest murmurs that her neighbor's grand townhouse turned out to be a beautiful coffin. Fine moldings, hiding timber so soft it folded in on itself one damp spring night. Or the whispers behind fans at a gala when someone hisses that Lady Whitcomb's fainting fits weren't delicate nerves at all, but arsenic dust peeling from her pastel nursery walls. Servants, too, found their quiet truths dragged into the daylight. Whispers of bad pipes and moldy beams became lines in tabloid scandals, side notes to the main show of ruined reputations and shuttered drawing rooms. Historians find these stories tucked between gossip of who wore what and who fled to the countryside after inspectors declared their beloved house unfit for polite company or for life itself. Some papers, hungry for fresh scandal, sent reporters to creep through half-collapsed townhouses, scribbling notes on damp floors, buckled staircases, green-smudged wallpaper that fluttered in cold drafts like a ghostly flag of surrender. One famous exposé showed sketches of hidden crawl spaces clogged with stale air headlines that made gaslight itself seem a villain lurking in every chandelier. Polite society, suddenly aware, scrambled to distance itself from the hush it had fostered. Laws sharpened inspectors, emboldened by scandal, poked into crawl spaces they once tiptoed around. Builders who'd cut corners found themselves answering to editors as much as the courts. Families stripped arsenic wallpaper overnight. Cracked windows, wide, replaced leaking pipes. Some honest repairs. Some frantic performance for neighbors who watched too closely. Yet not everyone rushed to fix the hush. For each grand scandal, a dozen quieter houses stayed the same behind curtains drawn tight. Some owners insisted their homes were different, newer, cleaner, safer. Others grumbled that all this fuss was just gossip, that fainting spells and headaches were simply the cost of living in fine old walls. Historians argue how much truly changed, and how much polite poison simply sank deeper into wood and plaster, waiting for the next soft draft to carry it forward. There's a strange comfort in these scandals, now proof that secrets can't stay hidden forever, that polite facades eventually betray their hush. Some families lost fortunes patching walls and tearing up pipes. Others turned the shame into fashionable virtue, boasting of fresh air and safe plaster, as if they'd invented honesty themselves. One curious letter survives from a maid who worked in a once grand house turned tabloid fodder. She wrote that the walls wept green when the inspectors scraped off the arsenic paper, that the family fled to Bath for the season and never returned. She stayed behind with a crew of laborers, watching them dig out rotten beams and cart away years of quiet danger, one timber at a time. Funny, she wrote, how you can clean the walls, but the hush still clings to the cracks if you listen at night. Modern restorers find these same cracks today, layers of scandal hidden behind new plaster gas pipes sealed with modern valves, but still whispering history if you know where to press your ear. The hush never really died. It shifted, softened, became a ghost, woven into the bones of houses that stand proud on postcard streets. So stand here in this parlor, where polite laughter once covered poison and scandal ripped that silence wide. Let the soft crackle of coal remind you that the hush never gives up easily. It finds new ways to settle in between boards behind drapes beneath new paint that promises the past has been scrubbed clean. When you're ready, follow me to the final room of this house, a place where modern eyes pry into old walls, diaries and broken beams. A place where the hush is cataloged, studied, whispered into museum labels, so that the soft poison that once drifted unnoticed might finally lose its last hiding place in the bright light of the present. Step carefully now into the quietest room of all, where the hush of the Victorian walls meets the rustle of modern gloves and the soft scrape of a trowel against old wood. Here in this final chamber, you stand among historians, archivists, and restorers who listen for secrets that once killed slowly, but now speak only in dust diaries and splintered beams. Picture a team in soft lamplight, heads bent over an exposed joist, tracing the trail of old mold hidden behind polished oak panels. They lift floorboards in houses turned museums, searching for the ghosts polite society never named. Each scrap of arsenic green wallpaper, each brittle gas pipe, each rusted brass fitting tells a hush retranslated into footnotes and museum placards that murmur, "This is how beauty lied." In their gloved hands, a piece of pastel paper flakes away still a ghostly green, the same deadly pigment once sold as the peak of fashion. Diaries lie open on workbenches, scrawled notes from a maid who wondered why her headaches wouldn't leave a mother's letter describing the baby who faded in a nursery sealed tight with good intentions. These small testaments echo through lab reports and dry museum tours. But if you lean close, you can still hear the soft sigh of walls that were never truly silent. Modern eyes peel back the hush layer by layer. Conservationists test old beams for mold spores and lead dust. City archives spill secrets once locked behind polite ledgers, builders' notes that betray corners cut for profit inspectors' letters, marked urgent but buried in filing cabinets no master of the house ever read. Each finding weaves the hush into something louder, a caution told in exhibits, lectures, late-night documentaries that whisper to us what the polished parlors never confessed. Historians argue about the legacy. Some say these houses were tragic accidents, born of ignorance, and an age obsessed with polish over safety. Others insist they were cautionary tales in real-time warnings ignored out of vanity and profit. Either way, each faint stain of arsenic on a baseboard, each warped beam in an attic, each hush behind wainscoting turned grave marker for secrets polite society could not outrun. Yet there's a comfort in seeing the hush named at last. Museum guides point to delicate swatches of arsenic wallpaper behind glass. Visitors press close to read the tiny labels Paris Green Popular from 1814 to 1890. Beautiful, deadly. The hush that once drifted through gaslit halls now sits harmless behind display cases, pinned down by words that refuse to let it slip back into silence. Picture a child on a school trip, peering through a roped-off doorway into a restored Victorian parlor. She sees the brass gas sconce, the coal grate, the thick velvet curtains. She listens to her teacher explain how something so beautiful could kill so softly. She asks, why didn't they just open a window? And the hush answers softly, because they didn't want to. Modern homes carry their own ghosts mold behind drywall lead, in old plumbing carbon, slipping from engines instead of coal grates. But we name these dangers, now wrestle them into reports, and regulations build new codes so that the hush has fewer places to hide. Each hidden beam, unearthed each diary, digitized each museum tour that ends with a gentle lesson is a small victory over a poison that once trusted silence to keep it safe. Stand here a little longer. Rest your hand on the rough joist someone once hid behind polished veneer. Listen to the soft shuffle of visitors stepping through restored rooms, the polite murmurs mixing with the faint creak of floorboards that held up secrets for a century or more. The hush is never fully gone. It lingers in soft drafts and quiet corners. but now it speaks in placards, tours, and whispered warnings that promise the next generation will hear it coming before it can settle too deep. Let the hush linger a moment longer until the gaslight hisses awake these halls again. The walls still whisper secrets you're not done chasing. So step closer, listen well, because as the shadows retreat, new questions flicker alive behind thick velvet curtains waiting for you in the uneasy glow ahead. And perhaps the first question that flickers to life is not what will kill you, but what will keep you from the peace of sleep in such a treacherous place. For in these same rooms, behind those same curtains, another kind of horror crept in when the lights were low, the torment of a mind that refuses to rest. Gaslight hisses through narrow hallways, spilling its uneasy glow onto brocade drapes and wooden bedposts, polished to a shine. Somewhere, a clock ticks louder than any clock should, reminding you that dawn is still far off. Yet your eyelids refuse their duty. What did they fear behind those thick velvet curtains? What did they hope to chase away with all this flickering light and thin excuses for company in the dead of night? The bed beneath you is piled high, feather mattress on feather mattress, until you're more swaddled than sleeping. The moment you shift, the downshifts, with you trapping your body in softness so dense it might just suffocate the dreams you're supposed to be having. Above your head, a pale glow of gaslight flickers the brass fixture, hissing quietly as coal gas feeds its flame. The technology is new enough to feel luxurious, and just old enough to be blamed for half the headaches in town. You'd think this glow might soothe you, like a nightlight for grown-ups. Instead, it leaks shadows into corners that used to be comfortably dark. Each wardrobe crack, each dresser knob, seems alive with a secret twitch. The late hour only makes the imagination more eager to collaborate. Every creak of the floorboards is a burglar. Every rustle at the window is the sigh of a streetwalker wandering home. But the true villain of this sleepless tale isn't some masked intruder or ghostly whisper. It's the mind itself fretting over bills, scandalous gossip, or whether tomorrow's fog will stain your Sunday best. Historians debate whether these nights of forced wakefulness were more about actual insomnia or the price of modern life creeping into private hours. Either way, the hush between midnight and dawn was rarely silent in a gas-lit bedroom. You lie there half buried under a mountain of blankets, listening to the soft pop and hiss of the flame. Outside the window, a lamplighter's pole scrapes the cobblestones as he checks the street lights. His silhouette flickers past the frosted pane, another sleepless soul in this tableau of quiet unrest. Somewhere deeper in the house, you catch a muffled cough, the soft clink of glass, as someone else medicates their restless mind. The bed itself, what a contradiction of comfort and curse. Heavy four-poster beds draped in velvet or thick cotton were the pride of the household, a sign you'd done well enough to smother yourself nightly in luxury. Yet many a journal complains of the heat, the dust, the feathers that shift and settle until you find yourself gasping in a nest that forgets to breathe. It's the perfect symbol for the Victorian paradox, progress and suffocation, all tucked into one. And as the minutes crawl on, you start to understand why someone might leave the gaslight on all night, ignoring the costs and the doctor's gentle warnings. Without that hiss and flicker, you'd be alone with your mind in the dark, and that you realize is far worse than paying another shilling for the coal man's next visit. They say insomnia is the cruelest thief, stealing time and replacing it with thoughts no one asked for. But in this bedroom, you're not alone. The whole city keeps watch with you, behind curtains, just like these counting the hours until the morning papers bring distraction. You listen, you shift, you sigh, and maybe if you're lucky, you drift off, just as the gaslight sputters out, plunging your room into a darkness you've both feared and longed for all night long. The smell hits you first, a syrupy sweetness drifting up from a glass vial on your nightstand. You sit up blinking at the pale blue dawn that hasn't quite decided whether to arrive or slink away. In the dimness, your hand closes around a tiny corked bottle labeled in elegant script, laudanum. Laudanum opium dissolved in alcohol, a miracle and a menace in equal measure. It sits alongside your headache powders and your grandmother's sachets of dried lavender, all promising the same thing: dreamless sleep that comes swiftly and leaves no trace but the bitter taste on your tongue. Victorians adored their poppy syrups. A drop for coughs, a sip for sleeplessness, a teaspoon for hysteria. Apothecaries sold it without shame. Doctors prescribed it with a wink, and poets swore by it when their verses refused to arrive before dawn. The substance wrapped itself in soft silk language cordial tincture elixir, but its bite was sharp. Some found it carried them to gentle dreams. Others drifted into depths they never returned from. You swirl the bottle, watching the amber liquid catch the gaslight's last flickers. The taste, they say, is floral and foul all at once, like flowers left to wilt in stale water. Take a little and your mind slows its chatter. Your muscles ease their tight coil. Take too much, and the world softens too far, folding into a sleep you might never wake from. Surviving letters hint at whether the laudanum craze was an unavoidable pitfall of the era's medical ignorance, or a convenient way to hush the restless, the grieving, and the inconveniently aware. You lie back, the syrup's warmth blooming through your veins. For a moment, the creaks in the floorboards hush themselves. The street noises fade into a cottony distance. Your thoughts grow lighter, like moths brushing against your skull instead of battering it. For a few blessed hours, there's nothing but the heavy perfume of poppies and the promise that dawn can be delayed just a little longer. But the cure has its price. Diaries of the day are peppered with half-legible lines. Insomniacs who turn dreamers, then addicts, then phantoms in their own homes. A mother dosing a baby's gums for teething. A father taking a swig before his night shift. Laudanum seeped into every domestic corner, a shadow at the edges of respectability. They called it Victorian England's quiet addiction. Poets like Coleridge and De Quincey wrote entire masterpieces under its fog. The same society that frowned on drunkenness tolerated opium as long as it stayed in polite bottles, tucked behind lace curtains, and doled out in teaspoons rather than tankards. Your eyelids flutter. You almost drift under, but part of you still lingers on the edge, half watching the bottle on the nightstand, half wondering how many neighbors are doing the same in their own flickering bedrooms. The gaslight might be off now, but the poppies burn on behind your eyes, soft red and endlessly blooming in the hush before daybreak. Before you drift too far under the syrup's hush, you feel it, the feather bed beneath you, swelling around your shoulders like a living creature. Victorians adored their beds so much, they practically built fortresses out of down cotton ticking and layered quilts heavy enough to pin a restless soul in place. Sink a little deeper, and you might discover just how suffocating comfort can be. The mattress itself is a double layer of feather-stuffed sacks, if you're fortunate enough to afford the good kind, the sort fluffed daily by your maid's strong arms and beaten into shape with a special stick called a feather beater. The sound of that morning ritual, thwack, 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 echoes through narrow hallways like a promise that tonight's sleep will be softer than a cloud, or so they claim. You shift searching for a hollow your hips haven't already carved out. Each movement stirs the feathers to life. They rustle, they settle, they breathe with you, except it never feels quite like your own breath. 1 minute you're too warm, the next too cold, and somewhere between tossing and turning, you realize the bed itself is the thief of sleep, not its friend. A strange paradox curls under your pillow. The richer your household, the more likely you are to be entombed by your own bedding. Poorer folk make do with straw pallets or horsehair pads, rough, yes, but less likely to smother you in your dreams. Modern analysis suggests whether this was luxury gone mad, or a simple result of colder houses demanding thicker nests. Either way, your grand bed is both throne and prison. Tug the counterpane higher. Feel its weight pressing your chest, a gentle but insistent reminder that comfort can be as clingy as worry. The night air beyond the drapes is cold, so cold your breath fogs when you dare peek at the frost creeping up the window's edge. But inside your feather fortress, the heat builds in pockets and sweat sticks your nightshirt to your back. A half-forgotten diary might tell you that housemaids of the age whispered about bed suffocation, an old wives' tale that children could vanish under too many quilts. A mother tucks in her little one layers on one blanket too many, and by morning the babe is lost to bad air or heavy down. Quirky nonsense, the doctor said, yet you can't help but wonder when the blankets settle over your mouth just shy of your nose. Still, you don't throw them off. Who would dare in these drafty rooms? The same gaslight that hissed you awake now leaves the air stale but warm, and the thought of a chill breeze slipping under the door is enough to tighten your grip on the bedding. So, you lie there, half buried, half awake, held by a bed that promises sweet dreams while quietly making them harder to reach. Maybe that's why the Victorians turned so easily to syrups and powders. After all, when your bed feels like a padded cage, what wouldn't you swallow to slip its grasp for a few short hours? A soft creak near the wardrobe reminds you that the night is never truly silent here. You hold your breath, listening. Was that a mouse, a settling beam, or something older, drifting through the gaslit gloom? Victorian houses talk at night. Pipes clank as hot water cools floorboards, sigh beneath carpets, and distant footsteps echo when nobody should be awake. In the hush of a restless bedroom, these tiny noises swell into something larger, an orchestra of creaks and whispers your mind is only too eager to conduct. You shift beneath your heavy bedding, trying not to disturb the hush that seems to lean in closer the longer you listen. The wind rattles a loose sash, tapping the pane like a polite ghost asking to be let in. Somewhere below, a fireplace crackles as embers settle, popping like knuckles being flexed in the dark. To calm these restless noises, some Victorians turned to gentle distractions. Pianos played softly in parlors, ticking clocks meant to lull instead of taunt, or the low rumble of street traffic rolling in from the gaslit roads. But for every soothing note, there was an echo of dread. How easily did a creak become a footstep, a knock become a spirit at the door? Night watchmen's reports from the time are full of odd sightings, a flicker at an attic window, a door ajar in a house thought empty. Historians still debate whether these tales were rooted in real break-ins, overactive imaginations, or the power of insomnia to conjure company from shadows. If you lived here, you'd tell yourself it's only the pipes, only the draft, only the weight of your own pulse thrumming in your ears. But lying awake with the gaslight flickering, the line between safe noises and subtle terrors wears thin. Every squeak of the bed frame becomes a question. Every shiver of the drapes might be a long coat brushing past. A mother might hush her child with a lullaby about brave watchmen and locked doors, but she'd keep a poker by the hearth all the same. An insomniac husband might pretend he's listening for burglars, when really he's listening for nothing at all, just proof that he's not alone in his sleeplessness. So you lie there counting noises like sheep. A pop, a creak, a knock. You tell yourself the house is settling. You pretend the soft whisper behind the walls is only the pipes complaining about the cold. Somewhere deep in that rustle and groan, you hope sleep might slip in unnoticed if you can just convince yourself the ghosts are only in your mind. A muffled knock at the door. You don't startle, just shift deeper into your nest of quilts, wondering who would bother your restless sanctuary at this hour. The answer appears without stepping inside, a shadowy figure, hat in hand, eyes that gleam with promises of rest you can't find alone. Victorians adored odd cures, but few were odder than the midnight mesmerist. Part charlatan, part showman, sometimes half-believed healer. He arrived when laudanum failed, when warm milk and heavy blankets offered no relief. A soft tap on the door, a murmured greeting, a pocket watch glinting in the lamplight. "Look into my eyes," he whispers, leaning over your bed. His breath smells faintly of stale tea and clove oil. He carries a small leather case inside you. Imagine our props for his performance magnets, tiny mirrors, maybe a crystal pendulum that swings slow enough to drag your weary mind behind it. Close your eyes. Feel his hand hover near your temple. Hypnosis. They called it a gentle trance that promises to unlock sleep where tonics fail. Historians argue whether these midnight sessions were harmless rituals of suggestion or covert excuses for intimacy that polite society never acknowledged in daylight. In pamphlets sold near the tea shops, mesmerists advertised cures for hysteria, nightmares, even heartbreak. They claimed their trances could soothe the overtaxed nerves of housewives, merchants, overworked clerks. They whispered to the desperate, your mind can be tamed. Your sleep can be summoned. For a fee, of course. Your eyes flicker open under the mesmerist's slow command. Shadows on the ceiling swirl like ink in water. The pocket watch swings, left, right, left, ticking softly in time with the pulsing gaslight. Maybe you believe him. Maybe you don't. But for these few moments, someone else carries the burden of your sleepless mind. A quirky aside, some mesmerists insisted they could perform their art from a distance, sending trances across town by sheer force of will. Tales spread of aristocrats paying extra to be hypnotized while snug in their own beds, the mesmerist seated miles away, brow furrowed in concentration. Whether it worked or not remains lost in diaries and whispered rumors. You feel your limbs grow heavy. The old floorboards creak under the mesmerist's shift in weight. He hums a tune you can't quite place, and with every note, your thoughts drift a little closer to the edge of sleep. Perhaps this time it will work. Perhaps tonight you'll dream gently waking to find the mesmerist gone, his fee tucked neatly under the vase on your nightstand. Or perhaps you'll lie awake anyway, hypnotized, but stubbornly alert while the pocket watch swings and the dawn threatens to slip through the curtains once more. By now, you've tried the flickering gaslight, the hush of poppy syrup, the suffocating embrace of feather beds, even the slow sway of a mesmerist's pocket watch. Yet your eyes remain stubbornly wide, your mind busy with secrets it refuses to surrender to sleep. So you slip from bed feet, meeting the cold floor, and shuffle to the kitchen for that other Victorian remedy, a midnight snack. Tea toast milk, simple offerings to coax your body into submission. The kettle sits heavy on the stove, its metal belly clanking faintly as you pour water, waiting for the hiss and steam to chase away the night's stale air. Somewhere outside, a carriage rattles by its wheels, echoing down the cobbled street. You imagine you're not alone. How many restless souls stand by a kettle right now, clutching their cups, like talismans, against the dark. A crust of bread, buttered and sprinkled with a pinch of salt, or a slather of dripping, if you're less refined. Victorians believed warm milk could settle the humors. Thick white, slightly sweet, it slipped through the gut, and they hoped lulled the body into calm. Scholars still puzzle over if this ritual worked at all, or if it was simply a reason to wander the creaking house and pretend that movement could hush the mind. In grander homes, midnight feasts were more elaborate. Cold meat pies, a slice of sponge cake tea brewed strong enough to wake the dead, which naturally defeated the point. Some gentlemen stocked sherry for this hour, alone, a quiet sip, to round off the meal they'd never admit they needed. There's something oddly comforting about this secret meal. It feels stolen, almost illicit, a soft rebellion against the strict schedules of daylight. You can almost hear your neighbors shifting through their pantries, two cupboards creaking as they seek the same small comfort. A quirky truth, in some boarding houses tenants would slip a coin to a housemaid to deliver a tray of bread and milk just before dawn, an unspoken contract of sleeplessness shared between strangers. You sit at the plain wooden table candle, flickering steam rising from your chipped teacup. The bread is stale at the edges, but warm enough to fool your tongue. Each bite slows your thoughts, just a little grounding you in the simple reality of toast crumbs on your nightshirt and the soft drip of tea on your wrist. Will it work tonight? Will the milk coat your thoughts, the bread weigh them down, the tea hush your pulse? Or will you carry this full belly back to bed and lie awake all the same, staring at the ceiling, listening for creaks, wondering if dawn might find you, finally drifting off crumbs, still on your pillow, back under your quilts, belly warm with tea and toast? You tilt your head just enough to study the ceiling above. It greets you with an unfriendly pattern, yellowing patches, damp lines, tracing the story of a leak that no one's quite fixed yet. The plaster bubbles, here and there, hinting at secrets that might crumble onto your pillow if given half a chance. Victorian houses age badly in the night. In the daytime, the grime and damp are politely hidden by bustle and candlelight fresh flowers masking mildew. But come midnight, when you lie trapped beneath too many blankets, every stain on the ceiling becomes a map of your worries. You squint at a dark patch near the corner. Mold, or just an old water scar. It doesn't matter. Your mind gives it shape anyway. Maybe it's creeping across the lath and plaster, a tiny kingdom expanding with every drip. You wonder if your neighbor upstairs paces too, a teacup in hand, dripping his worries down through the floorboards into your ceiling's secret veins. A quirky note for the half-awake old builders sometimes stuff the gaps between joists with horsehair or sawdust insulation of a sort, but also a cozy nest for mice. Historians debate whether the plague of leaks and creeping damp in Victorian homes was due to careless landlords, London's relentless fog, or the sheer stubbornness of bricks that refused to stay dry. You shift under your blanket fort, half hoping to find a new hollow in the feather bed that doesn't squeak when you breathe. But the ceiling stains keep pulling your thoughts upward. Every blot becomes a question. Is there rot in the timbers, a hidden drip that will wake you with a wet splatter at 4 in the morning? Sometimes, sleeplessness is a restless mind, running circles around money, whether you can afford a builder, whether the landlord will send one before winter settles in for good. Or perhaps it's a darker shape, fear that the stain is alive, that the creeping patch of mold might slip into your lungs, settle there like a seed. A rustle at the baseboard pulls your gaze away. Just the house sighing, or a mouse inspecting your toast crumbs. You pull the blanket higher, watch the stain fade into a softer blur. And for a moment, you imagine a world where the ceiling stays bright white, the pipes stay dry, and the only thing above you is sleep's gentle shadow, waiting to drop its hush across your restless eyes. But tonight, the stains remain patient cartographers of your insomnia. The more you stare, the more you see. So you let your eyelids close again, promising yourself you'll ring the builder tomorrow, though you suspect tomorrow will arrive before you ever drift off. The ceiling stain fades behind your eyelids, but the restless churn of thoughts refuses to follow. Instead, your mind drifts sideways, snagging on a truth whispered behind lace curtains and thick velvet drapes. Sleeplessness, they said, was a woman's weakness. Victorian physicians were quick with labels: melancholia, hysteria, nerves. And if you were an insomniac woman, your tossing and turning might be blamed not on cold drafts or creaking pipes, but on your fragile, wandering mind. The cure: a scolding. Perhaps a dose of laudanum, or worse, silence pressed down as firmly as the featherbed that pinned you to your restlessness. Picture a parlor at dawn, a respectable lady slumped in a chair, eyelids heavy but refusing to drop. A doctor sits across from her pencil, tapping a notebook, diagnosing her sleepless nights as a symptom of her ungovernable spirit. Scholars still puzzle over whether the era's female hysteria was a true condition or a convenient box in which to lock away every inconvenient worry, doubt, or unspoken anger. You shift your legs beneath the covers, imagining how many bedrooms like yours hid the same secret battles. A wife pacing barefoot over creaking floorboards while her husband snores, oblivious to the demons that keep her mind pacing too. A daughter told not to read by candlelight, so late books, after all, only fuel the fragile mind with dangerous imaginings. A quirky prescription: some doctors insisted that a woman's sleeplessness could be cured by marriage, nothing like daily duties, and new babies to exhaust the mind into slumber. For the married, more children were prescribed if restlessness persisted, never mind that they arrived wrapped in new worries and sharper exhaustion that stole sleep just as surely. Your blanket shifts around your shoulders like the arms of some stern matron tucking you in too tight. Maybe you imagine a housemaid in the next room, scrubbing the hearth at dawn, after a night spent staring at cracked plaster. Or a governess reading by the glow of smuggled matches, while the house creaks and sighs around her. In diaries and fading letters, you'd find small rebellions, women who confess to hiding their insomnia behind polite nods and pressed handkerchiefs, then stealing moments to write, to dream, to imagine another life. Historians whisper that sleeplessness was sometimes a quiet protest. If the world would not give them peace in daylight, they'd take their hours back at midnight alone with their thoughts and a flickering lamp. You sigh. Somewhere outside your window, dawn tests the edges of the curtains. Sleep still evades you, but at least the night has given you this hidden kinship, insomniacs past and present all lying awake minds, busier than any doctor would ever dare to understand. Your eyelids drift shut, just for a heartbeat, then open again to the soft creak of floorboards that aren't your own. A slippered foot slides past your door, a faint shuffle that carries on down the corridor. You hold your breath. Perhaps it's a dream, but no. That's the unmistakable sigh of a door hinged further down the hall. Sleepwalkers. A secret legion of the sleepless who wandered creaking houses under moonlight, guided by dreams they wouldn't remember come dawn. Victorians wrote them into hushed cautionary tales, harmless ghosts of the living, drifting barefoot through drafty halls, candles flickering in loose hands. Some called it a nervous condition. Others whispered of curses or old family sins chasing restless feet across creaking floorboards. Push your covers aside. Listen the soft scuff of woolen slippers, the rustle of a nightgown hem brushing faded carpets. Sometimes it's a child, eyes wide, and blank murmuring secrets to the wall. Sometimes a well-to-do gentleman, stepping out into the cold garden slippers, darkening with dew he'll never remember touching. Surviving letters hint at whether Victorian sleepwalking was truly more common, or if it simply fascinated people enough to appear in penny dreadfuls and polite dinner gossip alike. Cases filled the pages of medical journals, tragic accidents on staircases, people found asleep in gardens, at dawn dripping with cold fog. A quirky rumor floated through London's parlors once that a famous opera singer sang her best arias not on stage, but pacing her bedroom in her sleep. Neighbors swore they heard her through thin plaster walls, notes trembling through the dark, while her waking voice never dared match their perfection. You wonder if the slippered ghost in your hallway has found what they seek. Perhaps they drift from room to room, like a worry with feet visiting the nursery, testing the latch on the pantry, pausing at your door to listen for the hush of your breath. They pass, leaving the air colder, the floorboards sighing their secrets back to silence. The Victorians were fascinated and terrified by these nighttime wanderers. Doctors pinned them down with fancy Latin somnambulism, but families feared the cracked stairs, the garden ponds, the open windows that waited to greet a sleepwalker's blind trust. You pull your blankets tighter, listen for the returning steps. Nothing but the hush of your pulse in your ears now. Somewhere, that slippered figure curls back into bed none the wiser for their midnight roaming, just as you lie awake wondering if your own feet might betray you too, if sleep ever decides to come calling in borrowed steps. A sigh at the window brings you back. Your eyes flick to the pale slice of dawn, peeking through a gap in the heavy drapes. The room is warm under your fortress of bedding, but outside that window waits a cruel draft, eager to sneak under every cracked sash and worn sill. Victorian homes were notorious for two things: damp walls and icy drafts. You can almost feel it now, a cold finger brushing your cheek when the wind shifts just so. To fight it, families piled on woolly blankets, layered bedspreads until you could barely turn over. And if you still shivered, you might slip a warming pan, hot coals encased in brass between the sheets to chase off the night's chill. But warmth came with a catch. Breathe too deeply under that mountain of blankets, and the air grows stale damp with your own sighs. Surviving letters hint at whether these suffocating sleep nests did more harm than good stale lungs and overheated bodies wrapped tight in good intentions. You pull the blanket to your chin, nose poking out just enough to test the air. Somewhere behind the curtain, the window rattles in its frame, wood swollen with rain paint flaking into soft drifts on the sill. Draft stoppers rolled, rag-stitched cushions snake along the base to block the worst of it. But a determined breeze always finds a way. Quirky solutions abounded. Some families nailed old carpets over their windows in winter, a soft, musty patchwork that muffled the street sounds and stifled the creeping cold. Others tucked heated bricks at their feet or wore knitted caps to bed. Nightcaps weren't just a quaint fashion, they were armor against the frost. Still, no amount of wool could hush the quiet dread of waking to a rattle in the glass. A rattling window might mean the latch was loose, a thief's delight, or that the icy fog was slipping in to settle across your chest. Mothers worried over babies turned blue-lipped under too many layers. Servants caught chills that lingered all season. You shift again, feeling the blankets tighten around your legs like an old promise, warm enough to keep you alive, heavy enough to pin your restless feet in place. Maybe the rattling at the window is only the wind teasing your resolve to stay tucked in. Maybe it's a reminder that no matter how thick your woolen battlements, the night air always finds its way to kiss your cheek, to whisper that sleep is a fragile truce between comfort and the cold world waiting just beyond the glass. The window quiets for now, but your mind stays open like a door that won't latch. The kettle's gone cold downstairs, the bread crusts have settled on a chipped plate, and your ceiling stain has faded with the dawn's first light. Yet still, sleep eludes you, hovering just beyond your reach like a story half told. So you reach instead for your quill. A scrap of paper waits on the nightstand, edges curled ink bottle sweating under the flickering flame. Victorian insomniacs often turn their sleepless hours into secret chronicles, sleep journals, dream notebooks, pages that caught the ghosts of thoughts refusing to hush. You dip the quill, hear its soft scratch as words snake across the paper. Nothing poetic tonight, just scraps of memory, a list of creaks and whispers that kept you company. Draft at window, laudanum nearly gone. Heard footsteps, watched ceiling stain grow teeth. The truth remains a matter of historical debate whether these journals were genuine attempts to cure sleeplessness. Some doctors prescribed them as a way to trap the mind's wild imaginings, or if they were quiet rebellions, tiny windows into private worlds too unruly for daylight. A quirky truth. Some dream notebooks survived, tucked in the backs of drawers or slipped between ledgers. In them, you'd find delicate sketches of ceiling stains transformed into dragons, scribbled prayers for rest, or fragments of half-dreams saw mother in garden. She spoke of oranges, a puzzle that only sleep could solve, but sleep never did. The nib scratches on. Outside dawn smudges the rooftops with pale smoke. Somewhere a milkman rattles his cart, his clinking bottles marking time more honestly than any ticking clock. You write that down too. Everything deserves a line in this night's quiet record. Maybe you'll read these pages tomorrow, by better light, and laugh at the half-formed fears and crooked thoughts that bloom at 3 a.m. Maybe you'll toss them into the fire, letting the restless night curl into smoke. Or maybe you'll tuck them away with the others, one more testament to a mind that refuses to surrender without first leaving footprints behind. You pause quill, hovering above a line that trails off into nothing. Perhaps the writing has done its work. Perhaps it's made your thoughts heavy enough to drift down, settle quiet at last. The gaslight flickers, your eyes grow softer with it, And somewhere between ink and dawn, you find yourself hoping that sleep might finally trust you enough to visit carrying your dreams in scraps of paper and soft candlelight. The pages lie scattered by your elbow, blotched with ink and half-sensible lines that only the night could find interesting. Still, sleep tiptoes past you, unimpressed, unbothered. What else is left for the weary Victorian who's tried every flickering light, every sticky syrup, every hypnotic whisper? For some, the answer was simple, extravagant, and just absurd enough to feel reasonable at 3 a.m. Leave it all behind. Doctor's orders: pack your trunks and go abroad. It sounds dramatic, running from your sleepless pillow to sunnier shores. But for the wealthy insomniacs of the age, a prescription for fresh air and a change of scenery was as common as a spoonful of laudanum. Sea breezes, mountain air mineral springs anywhere but the same damp bedroom with its stained ceiling and sighing pipes. Historians argue whether these trips cured a single soul or simply offered a polite excuse to escape the gaslit gloom of London's foggy streets. The idea was simple enough if your nerves were rattled by city clamor. A gentle stroll through alpine meadows might hush them. If your mind buzzed with unpaid bills and gossip columns, a spa-town sulfur baths might soak the worry straight from your pores. Picture it, you bleary-eyed, from a month of creaking floorboards and cold window drafts, stepping onto a train bound for the Riviera. You cradle your sleep journal in your lap, glancing now and then at the countryside unrolling like a painted promise through soot-specked glass. A quirky glimpse into this traveling cure, some boarding houses in Switzerland and Italy marketed themselves as insomnia retreats. Gentle readings at dusk, bland meals at dawn, nurses in starched aprons who'd fuss over your pulse and prescribe long walks until you had no choice but to collapse into bed out of sheer boredom. Of course, this remedy was reserved for the fortunate few families with coins to spare and time to waste. The rest stayed home, piling more blankets on feather beds, pouring another thimble of poppy syrup, or scratching another restless thought into the margins of their sleep notebooks. You sigh, imagining your own flight to sunnier air. A soft bed by the sea, the hush of waves where clanking pipes can't intrude. Maybe there the ceiling stains are replaced by drifting clouds. Maybe the gaslight's hiss is swapped for gulls calling above salt-scrubbed roofs. And yet even then your mind wonders, does sleep come easier when your bed is unfamiliar? Or do you pack your insomnia in your valise tucked between your starched collars and spare stockings, only to unpack it again in a new room under a new ceiling as the sea hums your thoughts back to wakefulness? Back in your gaslit bedroom, no Riviera sun on your cheek, no alpine breeze coaxing your eyes closed, you find your mind wandering instead to stories. If sleep won't come, at least words might. Victorians knew this truth well. When the ceiling offered only damp secrets, you turned to the page. Flick open a battered novel by your bedside. Its spine cracks softly in the hush before dawn. There between yellowed pages, insomnia finds a strange sort of home. You're not alone. Your sleepless thoughts nestle beside characters, pacing candlelit rooms just like yours. Victorian authors adored sleeplessness. It slithered through pages of Dickens' Bronte Collins. A restless hero, eyes red from worry. A lady in her dressing gown, drifting from window to window while the household sleeps. Historians debate whether this obsession was moral scolding or sympathetic confession. Was insomnia a sign of deep feeling, or weak will turn the page? There's the solitary detective half mad with theories that won't rest. The ghostly governess wide awake in her drafty attic room. Even the villains lie awake scheming plotting under blankets as heavy as their secrets. Your mind hums in time with theirs, your own sleeplessness, echoing theirs line for line. A quirky note, some novels came with advice, woven between the drama fiction, disguised as gentle instruction. In a scene about an insomniac lady, you might find a paragraph praising warm milk, gentle strolls, or soft linen pillows, as if the author leaned close to whisper, "This might help you too, dear reader." You shift in bed, the book propped on your knees. Words blur as your eyes sting with fatigue, but each line feels like company, better than ceiling stains, better than rattling windows, better even than your sleep journal, which now lies, closed its ink drying beside your cold teacup. How many nights did Victorian readers keep vigil like this, a candle guttering beside a novel eyelids drooping, but mind alive with plots that promised no sleep, but offered sweet distraction instead? Stories turned wakefulness into a shared condition. If Jane Eyre couldn't sleep, why should you worry that you can't either? Maybe that's the quiet truth. The pages don't cure your insomnia. They bless it. They say, "Here, wander a while longer. You're in good company." And so, you do one word at a time, while the dawn nudges its pale fingers under your curtain, and the characters keep you awake just long enough to forget you meant to sleep at all. You close the novel, its pages still warm from your restless hands. The first light has found the ceiling stain, the window draft, the curled sleep journal, but instead of sleep, something else drifts in with the dawn, a new promise from the city's nerve doctors and quiet clinics that sprouted up like mushrooms in the late Victorian age. If your gaslight, your poppy syrup, your hypnotist's pocket watch failed you, then perhaps a gentle talk might cure what the heavy blankets could not. Early sleep clinics, half parlor, half experiment, offered a radical idea that your mind might find rest if only someone would listen to its rambling ghosts. Step through a plain door, tucked between a tobacconist and a greengrocer. Sit in a chair, a bit too stiff for comfort. Across from you, a soft-voiced nerve doctor, more philosopher than physician, asks when you last slept through the night. You tell him about the ceiling stain, the creaks, the footsteps and slippers. He nods, pencil scratching, as if every detail is precious cargo. The truth remains a matter of historical debate, whether these talking cures were medical quackery or the first tremors of modern psychology stirring under gaslit ceilings. A few called it nonsense, just chatter wrapped in velvet curtains. But for the sleepless, even nonsense felt better than silence. Quirky detail, some nerve doctors held sessions at dawn, knowing their clients were already wide-eyed and worn thin from a night of pacing. One early practitioner supposedly offered cups of hot milk during the appointment. One more ritual folded into the quiet promise that by speaking the worry aloud, you might coax it to drift away. You lean back in your imagined chair, words tumbling out in hushes and half-finished thoughts. Maybe you tell them about your mother's poppy syrup, your father's cold brick wrapped in flannel, the hypnotist's watch, swinging like a tiny moon. Maybe you admit that your mind writes stories when your body begs for rest. Outside, the city hums awake milk carts, lamplighters done for the night, grocers lifting shutters. The nerve doctor jots a final line and closes his notebook. He doesn't promise you sleep tonight or tomorrow or the night after that. But he leaves you with a strange gift, the sense that you're not entirely to blame. Your mind's midnight wanderings are no sign of weak will or broken virtue, just another echo of a world that hasn't quite learned how to hush itself yet. And so, you stand step back onto the damp street, dawn at your back. The sleepless night has ended, the waking day already tapping your shoulder. Whether sleep finds you or not, at least your secrets are no longer alone, scribbled now in a doctor's neat hand, waiting perhaps for someone else to dream them away. And so, we arrive here, your eyelids heavy, but your thoughts still pacing as the first rays of sun slip stubbornly past the old drapes and settle on your pillow like an unwelcome visitor. In this hush, between exhaustion and dawn, one truth lingers: the restless nights of the Victorian age never really ended. They just shaped the way we still chase sleep now. Lying under your mountain of wool and feather, you feel it, that invisible thread connecting your gaslit bedroom to the quiet halls of early sleep clinics, to hypnotists with their swinging watches, to glass vials of laudanum hidden in bedside drawers. Those soft footsteps of sleepwalkers, the hush of nighttime scribbles in dream notebooks, each echo has found its way here beneath your restless ribs. It's easy to forget how modern sleep medicine owes its soft beginnings to these desperate gasping nights. Surviving letters hint at whether Victorian insomnia truly was worse than ours, or simply better documented in the flickering candlelight of diaries, novels, and quack cures. But one thing remains clear: their sleeplessness forced doctors to wonder if the mind could be studied like any other part of the body. Prodded, mapped, soothed. A quirky detail you'd find buried in old hospital ledgers: some of the first psychiatric wards started as wings for the nervous sleepless. Rest homes in the countryside promised gentle talk and fresh air, the great-great-grandparents of today's clinics and therapies that still promise the same hush. You close your eyes again. Outside, the city breathes in its morning fog, horse carts rattling past distant church bells, marking a new hour you'll likely face, with half your mind still wandering midnight corridors. Yet in some soft, stubborn way, the sleepless Victorians gave us the right to admit our insomnia instead of hiding it. They taught us to write it down, talk it out, treat it not as a failing, but as another quirk of the human coil. So if sleep won't come, maybe listen closer. Under the hush, you crave shadows, stir whispers you can't see, but they're there. Not just memories, but things alive, moving behind doors and curtains. Breathe deep and ask what else hides where we think we're safe. Under those velvet curtains and behind polished doors, something else thrived: silent invaders. Cholera lurking in the cistern, typhoid clinging to teacups. While society ladies fluttered fans and whispered family scandals, microbes swirled in warm air, breeding where lace and linen couldn't keep them out. How did luxury turn so quickly into a hidden incubator for deadly outbreaks? And what secrets did these elegant parlors conceal, besides whispered gossip and unspoken rivalries? You wander into a stately Victorian townhouse, its brass door knocker polished bright enough to blind a passerby on a dull London day. Inside, your shoes sink into an expensive rug that muffles footsteps, but not the creak of floorboards below. The drawing room greets you with a soft hush of damask curtains, floral wallpaper, and the faint scent of rosewater, pleasant enough to distract from the sour tang of stale air. No open window dares disturb. Here, the polite chatter floats like dust motes in a sunbeam. Ladies in pastel gowns murmur about opera tickets, their gloved hands brushing embroidered cushions that rarely see fresh air. Gentlemen puff cigars near the fireplace, carving out conspiracies about city expansion trade routes or the latest scandal at court. All the while, something else gathers in the corners, invisible threats that thrive in damp, crowded cities, bursting with new wealth and poor plumbing. It was the mid-19th century, an age of gleaming prosperity for those who could afford lace curtains and gas lamps. Yet beneath this gilded layer lurked one of history's worst urban nightmares. Epidemics of cholera, typhoid, diphtheria, diseases that slipped into these fancy sitting rooms through the very pipes meant to modernize them. The fact that a family could toast to progress one night and be bedridden the next was an irony not lost on those who read grim obituaries in morning papers delivered by hand. One historical note worth pausing on: the British elite prided themselves on civility. Yet their refined habits hid a truth: those heavy drapes, so fashionable, trapped heat and moisture, turning lovely rooms into breeding grounds for bacteria. One scholar recently suggested these fabrics were luxurious microclimates for germs, a term your ancestors would have sniffed at nose high above reality. Meanwhile, chamber pots sat quietly behind screens, emptied by servants into a drainage system, barely better than a medieval gutter. Housemaids polished doorknobs and candlesticks, but rarely scrubbed their own hands. After all, soap was for visible dirt, not invisible killers. Yet there's something oddly comforting in this contradiction: how people believed decorum alone could keep the world's filth at bay. Even when a neighbor's child fell ill down the street, the drawing room remained a bubble where polite laughter stifled talk of infection. Many families believed good manners could outwit bad air. Scholars still puzzle over whether this blind faith was true ignorance or simply the only armor they had. Picture yourself leaning back into a velvet armchair, hearing the faint cough of a visiting cousin. She says it's just the London fog irritating her throat. But outside, beneath cobblestone streets, raw sewage runs close enough to seep into the water jug perched innocently on a sideboard. You sip your tea, unaware that your next breath carries more than the smell of bergamot. And so you sit, listening to the rustle of skirts, the crackle of the hearth, the drip of a leaky pipe somewhere behind the walls. These sounds blend into the polite conversation, masking how in this lavish room the seeds of an outbreak germinate in silence. It's a paradox that lingers through the centuries, a reminder that beneath velvet and veneer, every luxury has its price. So settle deeper into this fragile luxury. Let your mind wander through soft furnishings and darker corners, because tonight you'll see how the richest homes with all their refined comforts played host to invisible guests no invitation could keep away. A soft cough, a gentle clink of porcelain, and you're drifting into the next room, where polite tea parties spill secrets alongside sugar cubes. Here beneath a chandelier, casting shadows on painted walls, you watch ladies gather in tight circles around tables draped in lace. A fresh pot of Darjeeling steams beside a tiered stand of sponge cakes, seed buns, and delicate sandwiches with the crusts cut off just so. It's a picture of refinement until you remember what lurks unseen along the rim of each porcelain cup. Tea was the social glue of the Victorian elite, binding gossip alliances and fragile reputations. But these dainty gatherings also turned into subtle outbreaks. One cup passed from hand to hand, a shared spoon stirring the sugar bowl, all perfectly innocent exchanges that let microbes slip unnoticed from guest to guest. You can almost hear the scrape of a teaspoon swirling milk into a pale brew, while a lady of the house boasts of her new carpet from Brussels. Meanwhile, her cook downstairs wonders if the water boiled long enough. And outside, a delivery boy coughs into a gloved palm before handing over the daily bread. One fact worth sipping on: historians agree that while cholera famously struck the working classes, the hardest typhoid found surprising traction in these genteel parlors. A single infected guest might drop by for polite conversation and leave behind more than idle chatter. The idea that such gracious circles hid such hazards still puzzles scholars who debate whether these households knew and ignored the risk or truly believed their status made them immune. The irony: a lady who'd never dare speak of bodily functions might find herself hosting them in the worst way by week's end. Tea flowed freely. So did infection. Yet the silver trays gleamed. The conversation stayed bright, and everyone pretended all was well until the doctor arrived too late in most cases to stop the quiet spread. Look closer at the details: sugar lumps handled by unwashed fingers, cream served in jugs left on sideboards overnight, little cakes resting on doilies, absorbing stale air already thick with guests' soft coughs. It's easy to imagine yourself at the table nodding along as talk shifts from the latest novel to whether the Prince of Wales's scandal is true. One guest dabs her nose with a lace kerchief, discreetly apologetically, before lifting her teacup again. Around her, no one mentions illness. It's not done. Back then, politeness often trumped prudence. The social sin was to speak of disease where cake was served. Better to whisper behind fans than to open a window or cancel an afternoon tea. And so these intimate circles turned into gentle incubators for microbes eager to hitch a ride on the next handshake, the next polite kiss on the cheek. Today, we might chuckle at the naivety or shudder at how easily it mirrors our own blind spots. Modern analysis suggests whether it was simple ignorance, stubborn etiquette, or a fatal mix of both that let epidemics linger among the upper crust. So, pour yourself another cup in your mind's eye. Smell the steam rising from fine china, and know that each polite sip carried a risk as hidden and silent as the secrets these drawing rooms were so careful to keep. A hush falls over the drawing room as you slip quietly down a narrow hallway, its wallpaper just beginning to peel near the skirting boards. Here behind doors, only half closed, the proper world of parlors and polite tea parties gives way to sick rooms pressed tight against the very walls that once rang with laughter. You stand at the threshold of a bedchamber where the curtains are drawn, not for elegance this time, but to keep neighbors from peering in. A figure lies beneath layers of quilts, too many perhaps, trapping stale air and fevered breath. Somewhere on a low table, a bottle of laudanum waits beside a chipped glass of water, fetched from a cistern no one trusts entirely. Victorian homes, especially those in London's swelling suburbs, squeezed families into close quarters, where the line between healthy spaces and infected ones blurred at the turn of a doorknob. Parlors opened into hallways. Hallways edged up against bedrooms, where coughs echoed through thin plaster walls. A polite dinner might pause only briefly when someone upstairs began to wheeze, then resume plates, clinking conversation, politely steered away from the uncomfortable truth above. One fact to settle into: medical historians agree that urban Britain's cramped layouts did more to spread infection than any crowded tenement. Even well-to-do families found themselves sharing rooms with sick relatives when space ran out. Scholars still debate whether this was the fault of stubborn design, narrow Victorian townhouses stacked like matchboxes, or simply the harsh arithmetic of too many people and not enough square feet. Picture it: a sick child in the back bedroom, a grandmother coughing softly behind a door barely thick enough to muffle the sound, and all the while visitors ring the front bell with baskets of fruit and polite concern. They stepped carefully past the sick room door, pretending not to hear. Quirky as it sounds, some families hung dark cloth over windows when disease struck a double duty to block nosy neighbors, and they hoped ward off bad air. The belief lingered that foul smells carried illness, so curtains stayed drawn, rooms stayed stuffy, and the invisible threat multiplied in the gloom. Still, life went on. The drawing room next door kept its shape a space for embroidery circles and piano recitals, its furniture arranged just so, a fire flickering to warm ankles and unknowingly circulate infected air. Guests sat politely breathing the same stale warmth that seeped through the walls from a sickbed only steps away. If you lean in now, you can almost feel that fragile barrier, the door that separates respectable company from whispered dread. And through the thin plaster, you hear a muffled cough that refuses to be hidden. It's an uneasy comfort, this closeness. Families held together by blood walls, and the quiet promise that maybe this illness would skip them if they just kept smiling through supper. Even now, historians argue, did these families know better and fear the scandal more than the sickness? Or did they truly trust thick drapes and heavy doors to protect them from what moved so easily between rooms? And so you stand there, half in the bright world of the parlor, half in the hush of the sick room, listening as life and death share the same hallway, separated only by a door you're never quite sure you should open. A single door swing brings you from the hush of the sick room to a place no grand Victorian household could do without a pantry hidden off the kitchen, cool in summer, slightly sour in winter, lined with shelves bowing under the weight of good intentions and questionable safety. You step inside. The air is sharp with the faint sting of vinegar and the sweetness of jam sealed beneath waxy paper. A side of ham hangs from a hook, draped in muslin to keep flies away. Stone jars of cream sit beside eggs nestled in straw. But in the dim light, the promise of hearty family dinners masks the pantry's darker role, a quiet breeding ground for spoiled food and hidden hazards. For all the sophistication of the drawing rooms and parlors, Victorian kitchens were stubbornly medieval in their hygiene. There were no refrigerators humming in the corner, no digital readout telling you if the milk was past its prime. Fresh meat came home wrapped in paper, and hope it would be cooked before the summer warmth turned it green around the edges. One historical fact to chew on before pasteurization caught on milk was among the stealthiest killers. Left too long in a jug on the pantry shelf, it could harbor tuberculosis, typhoid, or plain old gut-wrenching bacteria that knew how to ruin a supper and a family's good name in equal measure. Modern analysis suggests about which was worse for the Victorian table ignorance of microbes or blind trust in the maid's nose to sniff out bad cream. Peek at that basket of bread on the shelf fresh. Yes, but was the flour milled cleanly? Did the baker sweep out the rats that ran behind the bins at dawn? In this world, every ingredient carried a quiet question mark, and the wealthy, ever eager to show off imported delicacies, sugared fruits from the colonies, exotic spices, expensive cuts of meat, rarely knew how these treasures traveled. By the time the butler stacked them neatly in the pantry, the seeds of sickness might already be tucked among the raisins. And the quirks, they're everywhere hidden in old recipes and household manuals. Vinegar-soaked cloths draped over butter crocks. A sprinkle of salt meant to purify suspect fish. charcoal tucked into water barrels to sweeten what smelled off. Clever sometimes, effective rarely. Picture yourself leaning on the cool stone shelf, listening to the creak of the kitchen door as the cook bustles about, balancing a week's worth of menus on what hasn't turned yet. Maybe she glances at a pot of stew, lifts the lid, and shrugs a pinch of spice will mask the taste. Upstairs, the family never suspects that tonight's roast beef might be more than a meal. It might be an invitation to a night spent fevered and doubled over. Even so, this pantry hums with pride. A well-stocked larder was a symbol of prosperity. The more shelves groaned with jars, the wealthier you seemed, no matter that some of those jars hid mold beneath a neat wax seal. And who would dare throw out a costly wedge of cheese just because it smelled faintly off? Waste was far more scandalous than a quiet case of food poisoning. Surviving letters hint at how much these families really knew. Were they reckless, or did they balance risk against the cold reality that food preservation was an imperfect art, not a guaranteed science? There's a sad wisdom here, tucked between the dusty jars. Sometimes a sour smell was the only warning you'd get. So stand a moment longer. In this pantry, feel the damp chill against your skin. Imagine the hush of secrets folded into every cloth-wrapped ham, every jug of cream. In the next room, the drawing room waits, promising warmth and civility. But down here, where the meat sweats on its hook and the bread grows stale in silence, you see how the next outbreak might already be simmering. Hidden behind a cupboard door, no one thinks to fear. Follow the scent of stewing broth and candle wax back into the heart of the house, where polished stair banisters and gleaming brass lamps meet something far less refined pipes snaking through walls, floorboards, and basements, carrying away what polite society never mentioned in daylight. Victorian plumbing was a marvel of the modern age. They claimed an invention that brought fresh water into drawing rooms and flushed away unpleasantness with the turn of a handle. But every pipe told two stories, one of convenience and one of hidden peril. Imagine tracing your fingers along a cold iron pipe running down a townhouse wall. It hums softly alive with water that isn't half as clean as its owners believe. Upstairs, someone fills a porcelain basin to wash before dinner, humming a tune learned at finishing school. Downstairs, the same pipe leaks a slow trickle into a basement drain, where rats gather in the damp shadows. One historical fact, worth plumbing deeper: the great Victorian sewer projects, proud engineering feats, connected entire neighborhoods with underground rivers meant to whisk away waste. But those same pipes often cracked, backflowed, and seeped filth back into kitchens and sculleries. In some cities, water supply and waste channels ran side by side, separated only by wishful thinking and questionable brickwork. Historians still debate over how many outbreaks of cholera and typhoid were born not from slums alone, but from these untrustworthy veins threading through upper-class homes. Consider the paradox: families who fussed over velvet upholstery and imported mahogany tables willingly let half-trained plumbers hammer iron pipes into their walls. The gleaming tap in the corner of the drawing room promised progress until a sudden gurgle reminded them that the same pipe connected them to neighbors whose hygiene might be less than impeccable. And the quirks? They're buried in letters and old city reports, tales of fancy water closets that overflowed spectacularly, of families so proud of their indoor plumbing, they hosted tours for friends to admire the polished brass flush handle. Little did those visitors know that every flush risked stirring up the very miasma they so feared. Picture yourself standing at the edge of a tiled washroom. The maid pours water into a bathtub, steam curling around her apron strings. Somewhere below, a cracked sewer line feeds that warm bath with more than fresh water. The family upstairs drifts into sleep on feather mattresses, none the wiser that tonight's comfort comes with a hidden invitation to tomorrow's fever. Yet they trusted these pipes as symbols of sophistication, marvels to show off between servings of roast goose and plum pudding. And when the coughing started, they blamed foul air drifting in from the Thames or the neighbor's pigsty, never suspecting that the danger wound through their own walls. Historians debate whether Victorians ignored the signs or simply didn't want to believe that modernity could betray them. The same belief that turned drawing rooms into showcases of progress also made families blind to what trickled just beneath their floors. So stand here a moment longer. Feel the damp chill of the basement where the pipes groan and drip. Above you, chandeliers flicker over dinner tables. But down here in the shadows, you see what they refuse to face. Progress is never spotless, and every gleaming pipe has its leaks, waiting patiently to remind the finest homes that luxury and filth often share the same narrow channel. Slip back upstairs now, past the clank of iron pipes, through the pantry's sour hush, and find yourself once more in the drawing room's gentle glow. The fire flickers in the grate, polished brass fenders gleam, and a tray of silver cutlery rests on a sideboard, waiting to catch the flickering candlelight at supper. It's a scene of civility, polished shoes, polite laughter, the soft rustle of skirts crossing the carpet. But look closer at those hands passing teacups and carving roasts, and you'll find the era's quietest scandal, the strange refusal to wash up. Unwashed hands, gentle manners, two things that should never have gone together, yet strolled arm in arm through Victorian households like old friends, pretending not to notice each other's flaws. Soap was no stranger to these homes. It sat perfumed and decorative beside basins, in bedrooms and powder rooms. But washing was more ritual than hygiene, an exercise in visible respectability. A quick dab to freshen a face before guests arrived, a scented cloth to wipe away travel dust. Actual scrubbing. That was for laborers in muddy boots, not for ladies with lace cuffs or gentlemen clutching monogrammed handkerchiefs. One fact to grip as you lean over that silver cutlery. While germ theory crept slowly through medical journals, most households remained loyal to the older idea that dirt meant visible filth. If your hands looked clean, then surely they were clean. Scholars still puzzle over whether this was stubborn tradition or an honest misunderstanding. Did the upper classes cling to soap as a luxury scent, while missing its true power to scrub away invisible threats? Peer into an etiquette guide from the 1860s, and you'll see pages on when to bow, how to address an earl's second cousin, how to pass a calling card just so. But hand washing before slicing bread for guests? Barely a mention. Instead, servants were expected to appear neat, their nails discreetly hidden under gloves if stained. The master of the house might pride himself on trimming a roast at the head of the table, his cufflinks winking in candlelight, unaware that the same fingers had moments ago tipped the coal scuttle open or patted the family dog behind the ear. The quirks multiply the closer you look. Napkins were prized symbols of refinement, embroidered linen triangles to dab lips catch crumbs and conceal the faintest hint of carelessness. Yet the same napkin might be refolded and used again at the next meal, handled by hands that trusted appearances more than soap and water. Picture yourself seated now at that dining table, silver fork balanced between your fingers. You watch as the lady of the house signals the maid to serve the next course. The spoon that ladles out the soup was polished bright that morning, but the hands that carried it from kitchen to table not so carefully scrubbed. And so, the invisible guests arrive unnoticed typhoid, hitching a ride on an elegant ladle cholera, slipping from unwashed palms to pristine porcelain. If you could step back in time and whisper a warning, would they believe you? Or would they smile, politely, wave a scented handkerchief, and remind you that good breeding alone was surely protection enough? Scholars still debate whether these families truly trusted etiquette to shield them, or if they simply chose not to see the truth at all. So linger a moment longer in this softly lit room. Listen to the muted clink of cutlery, the gentle cough behind a lace fan, the warm crackle of a hearth where polite conversation masks a quiet truth. No amount of silver polish can shine away what lurks on unwashed fingertips. And tomorrow's fever may already be waiting on the handle of a butter knife, passed politely from plate to plate beneath the chandelier's sleepy glow. Step softly from the dining room's gentle clatter into the narrow back hall where the laughter of polite society fades behind a servant's swinging door. Here, the world feels different, cooler, quieter, and edged with the faint tang of carbolic soap that almost masks the musty scent of worn uniforms and damp aprons drying by the hearth. This is the realm of housemaid scullery girls and laundry hands, an invisible army whose labor kept lace curtains spotless and brass door handles gleaming. Yet behind every polished door and crisp linen sheet lurked an unsettling secret. These same servants often carried more than clean laundry from room to room. They carried typhus lice and germs tucked beneath starched collars and calloused hands. Pause a moment by the scullery sink. Picture a young maid, sleeves rolled to her elbows, scrubbing muddy boots that trailed London's grime indoors. She dips her raw knuckles in greasy water, dries them on her apron, then climbs the back stairs to change the chamber pot of the lady of the house, never pausing to wash in between. Who would expect her to soap was precious time scarcer, and no one questioned the invisible trail she left behind on doorknobs and bedposts. One historical fact in mid-Victorian Britain: domestic servants made up a full tenth of the population. Households boasted their staff count the way we might flaunt square footage today. But these loyal workers often lived in cramped attic rooms, sleeping head to foot in narrow beds, sharing linens and coughs without a second thought. The truth remains a matter of historical debate, whether employers genuinely didn't see the risk or quietly accepted it, believing fresh uniforms and a polite bow could keep disease at bay. Quirks abound in old household guides' instructions for maids to polish cutlery until their wrists ache to scrub floors on hands and knees, to carry steaming pans of laundry water up and down steep stairs. What's rarely mentioned is how often these same tasks ferried microbes between the hidden corners of the house: unwashed hands, smoothing pillowcases, damp cloths, carrying bacteria from one bedroom to the next. Imagine standing now in a shadowy linen closet where a stack of freshly laundered sheets waits for tomorrow's turndown. The scent is clean lavender, tucked between folds of trick to cover the stale air of attic drying racks. Yet you know what lingers unseen: the wash basin rarely scoured between loads, the same water used for multiple bed sheets. When soap ran low, the faint cough echoing down the hall as another housemaid ties her bonnet and fetches the day's coal. Picture, too, the irony families who prided themselves on sealed windows and tightly drawn curtains, sure that fresh air was more dangerous than a maid's sniffle, often sealed the real threat right inside their walls. A loyal servant might unknowingly tuck fever into every perfectly folded towel, every freshly beaten carpet. If you listen closely, you can almost hear the soft pad of slippers on cold stone floors at dawn, the clink of a broom against a brass spittoon, the gentle cough muffled behind a gloved hand as a housemaid lights the morning fire in the master's study. These sounds stitch daily life together, ordinary, invisible, and quietly treacherous. Historians puzzle over it. Did the upper crust truly trust that their spotless homes were safe simply because the danger wore an apron instead of a silk cravat? Or did they suspect and simply choose polite blindness, believing that the weight of a wage packet was enough to scrub away risk? So linger here, half hidden behind the linen press, listening to the faint creak of the servants' stairs. Above you, gas lamps flicker over embroidered pillows and polished sideboards. Below, damp boots, dry by the kitchen hearth, carrying tomorrow's fever up each narrow step, quiet as a whisper, certain as sunrise as polite society sleeps soundly overhead. Follow the faint scrape of slippers from the back hall to the hearth of the main sitting room, where the household gathers when winter drapes its damp chill over the city's narrow streets. Here, the fireplace glows like a quiet promise, embers crackling logs, hissing softly, velvet armchairs drawn close enough that knees nearly touch. If you lean in, you can almost feel the warmth on your shins, smell the resin-sweet smoke curling up the flue. It's cozy, comforting, and entirely unaware of the hidden guest it welcomes each winter influenza. In a world without central heating, families depended on their hearths. The bigger the house, the grander the fireplace, often several, each stoked day and night by housemaids who rose before dawn to coax flames from last night's ashes. A roaring fire made a room feel safe, even when the winds rattled the window panes and rain drummed on slate roofs. But the same warm room that brought relief from the damp was also the perfect place for flu to spread, cramped, airless, politely packed with relatives and callers eager for company. One historical fact that flickers through old journals: influenza swept through Victorian cities almost every winter, often dismissed as winter catarrh, or simply the cold. Families gathered closer to share warmth, passing coughs and sniffles along with shortbread and sherry. Historians argue whether the severity of some outbreaks was worsened by this seasonal custom of clustering around the fire, the only truly warm spot in a house where drafts lurked behind every curtain. Picture yourself perched on a tufted ottoman near the hearth. Someone offers you a biscuit from a tin. A cousin sneezes delicately into a lace handkerchief, mutters an apology, and reaches for another slice of plum cake. No one thinks to crack the window. It would let the warmth escape, defeating the purpose of huddling here in the first place. So the air grows stale heavy, with coughs hidden behind polite coughs and soft laughter. The quirks of this scene peek out in every detail. Hot bricks wrapped in flannel slip under blankets at bedtime, still warm from the fire. Families roast chestnuts in the coals, the shells popping and rolling onto the rug. Dogs doze by the hearth, their fur gathering soot and stray embers. All this domestic ease masks the fact that the living room was often a breeding ground where well-dressed visitors brought flu from crowded carriages, mingling germs with gossip before anyone realized how dangerous a single sneeze could be. Sometimes, families believed they were safe if they burned scented pine or sprinkled vinegar on the hearth to purify the air. Others trusted herbal poultices and patent tonics advertised in bright newspapers, convinced that a spoonful of syrup could stop the worst from creeping in. Historians debate over whether these hopeful remedies offered comfort or simply delayed the inevitable spread from one flushed face to the next. Lean closer to the fire now and imagine the quiet hours after guests leave. The logs sink into embers. The mantel clock ticks like a heartbeat, and a faint cough drifts down the hallway too small to stir alarm just yet. But the first flicker of a fever that may sweep through every bedchamber before spring thaws the city's damp stones. There's an irony in it, too. The same fireplace that kept out the cold invited something else to stay. Warmth drew people together close enough for a gentle brush of sleeves, a shared laugh, a polite pat on the hand. And in that closeness, the flu found its chance to bloom. So settle yourself on the hearthrug a moment longer. Feel the heat on your face, the chill at your back, where the drafts sneak in around loose window frames. Listen to the soft creak of a log splitting in the grate. In this hush, you understand how the comforts that made winter bearable for the Victorian family often made their drawing rooms perfect. Little greenhouses for invisible seeds of illness tucked behind lace curtains, whispered from guest to guest, crackling in the warmth, while the night wrapped the city in frost. Slip your shoes off at the door and pad softly into yet another corner of the Victorian home, a corner that promises life and freshness, yet hides another small betrayal of good intentions. Here in a drawing room alcove or a sunlit bay window, you find rows of potted ferns, palms and delicate ivy curling toward pale daylight that struggles through London's sooty air. Victorians adored their indoor gardens. To own a conservatory, however modest, was the height of refined taste. Greenery softened the stiff lines of mahogany sideboards, draped fronds over the gilt edges of photo frames, and gave even the gloomiest city house a faint whiff of imagined countryside. But these same leafy treasures did more than brighten parlors. They trapped stale air locked in damp and turned closed rooms into quiet breeding grounds for mold mildew and the invisible guests that slipped easily from leaves to lungs. One historical fact to breathe in indoor plants soared in popularity during the 19th century, driven by botanical fashions that made palms ferns and aspidistras the darlings of drawing rooms. But while they symbolized freshness and vitality, they often sat, neglected their pots turned sour with stagnant water. Historians argue whether households really understood that these pretty displays could make air more oppressive, not purer, especially when windows stayed stubbornly shut against the city's chill and its industrial stench. Imagine stepping closer to a potted palm tucked into a corner by the fireplace. Its broad leaves glisten under the touch of a maid's damp rag. Water drips onto a saucer lined with decorative pebbles, the soil damp and heavy beneath. The air smells faintly of wet earth and the dusty scent of aging upholstery. A lady of the house might brag about her indoor jungle, yet never suspect that within this lush corner, moisture lingered just enough to encourage mold spores to drift through the room, slipping easily into the lungs of guests who perched nearby sipping tea. Quirky details bloom among the fronds, glass cloches, trapping warmth over delicate seedlings, ornamental terrariums crowded with miniature ferns that fogged up in the evening chill. Porcelain plant stands meant to lift pots above drafty floors, but doing nothing to stop the still air pooling in corners. Manuals from the period offered elaborate advice for watering schedules, soil mixtures, and wiping leaves with diluted milk for shine, but rarely a word on how to balance fresh greenery with actual fresh air. Picture yourself leaning in to touch a frond. Your fingertip comes away damp, chilled by the hidden moisture that never quite evaporates in a house where windows are locked against London fog and coal smoke. The same stale air, already thick with coughs and soft conversation, now carries the faint tang of decay, sweet, almost pleasant, unless you know what it hides. Visitors praise these indoor gardens as a mark of cultured taste. A room lined with palms and ferns hinted at travel empire, the far-off tropics crammed neatly into an urban sitting room. But no one talked about the unseen side, the mold behind planters, the mildew creeping under carpets where water spilled and never fully dried. Historians debate if this lush fad did any real harm or merely added a damp twist to the other hidden perils of Victorian comfort. So pause here by the fern, stand a moment longer. Let your eyes drift over the trailing vines, the glossy leaves. Feel the dampness in the air, so gentle it barely registers, yet heavy enough to settle on lungs already weary from a winter cold or last night's gathering around the fire. In these tiny jungles, life pressed against the window pane. But so did the quiet truth that not all freshness brings relief. Sometimes the green corners of a home hide as much danger as any crowded street outside. Trace your steps from the hush of leafy corners back into the wider world of polite company, where doors swing open, boots are wiped with care, and visitors arrive trailing fog gossip and secrets on their polished shoes. Here in the drawing rooms of well-heeled families, social calls were more than routine, they were rituals. Courtesies exchanged like coin hugs and handshakes binding neighbors into tight circles that spun news and microbes alike around the city. You stand near the entrance hall as a footman takes a dripping coat from a caller just arrived from a damp London street. He bows stiffly, then ushers the guest into the parlor, where ladies adjust their skirts and gentlemen lean in to whisper rumors by the hearth. The air shifts fresh for a moment, then settles thick with perfume pipe smoke and the soft scratch of conversation. One fact to carry with you: in the 19th century, London's social dance demanded constant visiting. Calling cards arrived by the dozens each week, left in silver trays by front doors, to mark who had come, who must be repaid with a visit in turn. The grander the household, the busier its drawing room. But this polite carousel did more than swap stories. It turned neighbors into unknowing couriers of the latest flu, typhoid, or diphtheria. Scholars still puzzle over whether this ritual of calls and visits spread disease more efficiently than any public market. After all, a street vendor shouted his wares in open air, but here soft voices floated in enclosed spaces, hands clasped and kisses brushed across cheeks, in rooms where the air barely stirred behind thick curtains. Pause in a shadowy corner, now watching a lady lean close to a friend, her gloved hand resting lightly on an arm. They speak of the new play at the West End, a niece's engagement, the latest scandal about a certain banker's debt. Each laugh, each breath, spins a little more warmth into the room. But tucked within that warmth, microbes hover, drawn from crowded carriages, back alleys, and last week's gathering in another stately home. The quirks of this visiting culture still amuse scholars today: guides on when to sit and when to stand, how long to stay, 15 minutes for a quick call, an hour for tea, how to balance a cup and saucer without dribbling on the hostess's new carpet. But few guides warned about the subtle cost of these visits, the way a single cough behind a fan might leave half a neighborhood bedridden by week's end. Picture yourself beside a table where calling cards lie stacked like a paper city names, written in looping ink corners, folded just so to signal whether the visitor called in person or sent regrets. Each card a tiny footprint in a trail of polite contagion that traced itself from street to street, house to house. Occasionally, a door closed just in time, a polite fiction of no one at home today, when fever lurked behind bedroom doors. But more often, the show went on better to risk a cough than insult a neighbor with a cold welcome. Even when sniffles spread through a circle, the belief lingered that a well-placed posy or a drop of lavender water could keep foul air at bay. Historians puzzle over this gentle contradiction. Why did so many cling to ritual visiting when they knew deep down how easily sickness slipped through a polite handshake? Was it simple optimism, a refusal to believe friendship could harm? Or did they trust that a clean parlor and warm fire were armor enough against what lurked beyond the gaslit streets? Stay here a moment longer, tucked just inside the door, as another knock sounds. The maid lifts the latch, lets in a fresh gust of rain, and a new face, with cheeks flushed by the cold. A smile, a curtsy, a murmured greeting, and another invisible thread joins the web of warmth and whispers spun beneath the crystal chandelier. And so it goes. In drawing rooms, where social calls kept families stitched to their neighbors, one visit, one laugh, one handshake at a time, until the soft hush of polite company hid more than secrets. It hid the seeds of the next small wave of coughs that would soon echo down the hall. Step back from the gentle hum of polite visits and drift now toward a quieter part of the house, the place where society's smiles faded behind drawn curtains, and every cough or fevered whisper took on the weight of scandal. Here, quarantine wasn't a neat system of hospital wards and public health orders. It was a lace curtain, hastily pinned shut, a discreet sign on a window, a closed front door no one dared knock upon until the sickness passed, if it passed at all. Stand at the foot of a townhouse stoop, rain dripping from your hat as you squint up at a second-story window. There behind the gauzy white hangs a scrap of cloth, or perhaps nothing at all, only a faint yellow glow where candles burn beside a sickbed. For many Victorian families, illness wasn't only an unwelcome visitor. It was a shame to be hidden from prying eyes, a private defeat whispered about in drawing rooms across the street. One historical fact worth peeking at through those half-shuttered windows: official quarantines did exist in 19th century Britain, especially when outbreaks struck the poor in overcrowded districts. But in wealthier neighborhoods, the unspoken code was different. A household struck by cholera or typhus might seal itself off servants slipping out at dawn for supplies, family members speaking in lowered voices about indisposition instead of disease. Historians still argue whether this self-imposed hush helped slow contagion or merely hid it better from polite society's watchful gaze. Picture yourself in a dim bedroom behind one such drawn curtain. A daughter lies beneath a tangle of heavy quilts, sweat darkening the lace collar at her throat. Her mother dips a cloth into a chipped basin of cool water, whispering reassurances that can't keep the fever at bay. Meanwhile, the drawing room downstairs is carefully arranged. Should any unexpected caller arrive, they'll be met with a polite excuse. She's resting a touch of fatigue, nothing more. The quirks of this hidden world surface in small details: windows smeared with tonic bottles, arranged just out of sight, neighbors sending baskets of oranges and invalid wine, but never daring to come inside. Even the local doctor might slip through the back door at nightcoat collar turned up to dodge questions. Better for the neighbors to think a family was merely enjoying a quiet evening than to suspect the household had become in whispered terms unwell. Sometimes families pinned small sprigs of herbs above door lintels, rosemary or lavender, said to purify the air and ward off misfortune. Others burned candles so heavily scented with pine or camphor that the hallway reeked like an apothecary, a polite signal to anyone nearby that they might want to keep walking. And all the while inside, the hush deepened, pressing against the heavy curtains, as if silence alone could stop a cough from echoing down the street. Surviving letters hint at over this paradox. How could a society so bound by ritual conversation become so expert at quiet when it came to sickness? Was it pride, fear that neighbors might gossip about uncleanliness or moral failing? Or was it a quiet mercy sparing polite company from the raw truth that all the lace and polished brass in the world couldn't keep disease from slipping under the front door? Stand here in the hall, just beyond that dim sick room. Hear the muffled sounds, labored breaths, a spoon stirring broth that no longer tempts an appetite, a mother's soft hum meant to soothe both patient and her own fear. Beyond the door, the parlor clock ticks, the world still spinning politely on, as if nothing inside these walls has changed. Outside, a neighbor glances up from the street eyes, lingering on the shuttered window. They cross themselves, or maybe just hurry on. After all, tomorrow, they too will host callers in their own drawing room, serving sponge cake and tea and air just as still, and curtains just as heavy. And if a cough rattles the china for them next week, well, polite silence will settle in once more. So pause here a moment longer. Feel the hush pressing at your shoulders, the secret weight of a household trying to hide its weakness from a world too polite to ask outright. In this drawn curtain, this whispered indisposition, you glimpse the quiet truth that for all their rituals and ribbons, Victorian families knew fear best when they tried hardest not to show it. Slip down the hallway and find yourself in a narrow front room where knowledge and guesswork collide, where a polished hat stand waits by the door and a leather bag rests on a walnut side table heavy with vials and folded gauze. Here, the family doctor arrives, removing his gloves with a practiced snap, his boots leaving damp marks on the patterned rug. He tips his hat, clears his throat, and smiles in that calm, assured way that says, "Trust me, I know more than you." But behind that mustache and polished cane lies a truth harder to disinfect than any infected wound. Many of these Victorian physicians didn't believe in germs at all. You sit in the corner, a polite ghost watching as the doctor leans over a patient, perhaps the flushed child bundled in blankets near the fireplace. He tugs his cuffs straight, peers at the tongue counts, the pulse sniffs once at the stale air. He frowns, not at bacteria, but at the so-called miasma, the bad air, the heavy damp, that in his mind brings on fevers like a spiteful spirit drifting through London's gaslit fog. One historical fact to tighten your grip on that velvet armchair germ theory was debated hotly in medical circles through the 1800s, while continental scientists like Pasteur were boiling flasks and peering down microscopes. Many respectable British doctors still swore by miasma theory, believing disease rose from rotting matter and foul smells not from invisible microbes passed by hand cough or kiss. Modern analysis suggests that this stubborn belief helped outbreaks linger behind drawing room doors long after the evidence said otherwise. Picture the quirks of this half-belief, half-ritual medicine. Doctors prescribed fresh air, but feared drafts. They recommended vinegar, sponged on door frames to keep contagion away, and swore by daily fumigation candles that smoked with camphor, or herbs that burned into oily clouds, all meant to chase bad air out the window. Meanwhile, The real culprits, a maid's unwashed hands, a cracked drainpipe crept unnoticed through the polished house. Watch him now, this respectable man, in his crisp collar, reaching into his bag for a glass bottle of laudanum or a packet of powders mixed by a chemist with more hope than science. He murmurs reassurances to the anxious mother. At the bedside, rest fresh linens, a boiled broth, perhaps another candle to scent the air. The family nods gratefully, never guessing that the same polite advice is offered 3 streets over, where a neighbor's child fights the same fever brought by the same cracked sewer line. Quirky little details survive in old notebooks, instructions for leaving windows cracked open just enough to tempt good air, or hanging muslin soaked in carbolic acid to block invisible poison from slipping through the door. A doctor might test the wind direction before pronouncing an area healthy enough to walk through. And if he did believe in contagion, he rarely said so aloud. It sounded faintly un-British to talk about microscopic creatures dancing on spoons and door handles. Historians puzzle over how these contradictions lingered so long. Some say it was pride-old training, stubbornly clinging to the authority of tradition. Some say it was fear, if disease could ride in unseen on the same hands that poured tea or passed a child a toy, then no household was safe, no matter how often the carpets were beaten and the brass polished bright. Imagine leaning closer to the fireplace now as the doctor stands to leave. He tips his hat again, gives his final advice in a voice meant to soothe burn. A little more lavender. Pull the curtains against the night's chill trust. That bad air won't linger if the room stays sweet. He steps out into the damp street, coat collar turned up against the city's real poison, a knowledge half glimpsed, but not yet fully believed. So pause here by the hearth, watching the mother settle back beside the sickbed, her hope pinned on the candle's flicker, and the promise that clean-smelling air will keep fever at bay. Outside, the fog curls through London's narrow lanes, carrying secrets the drawing room curtains can't quite keep out, and the next visitor, the next cough, the next polite nod may yet teach this household that bad air alone was never the real enemy at all. Step away from the doctor's careful bow and the hush of the sick room and follow the thin trail of scented smoke drifting through the hall. A curl of lavender, a whisper of camphor, the sweet tang of rosemary burned to hide the sour truth no drawing room wished to face outright. Here in the elegant corners of Victorian households, the cure for bad air wasn't medicine or modern plumbing. It was hope packaged in tiny bottles of snake oil and sticks of incense that promised purity where none truly lived. Pause by the mantel, where a cut glass holder cradles a thick scented candle. Its flame flickers beside a stack of fashion papers and an open letter sealed with a wax crest. The smell drifts softly pleasant, comforting a polite cover for the stale air pooling in heavy drapes and carpeted corners. One historical fact to lean on: by the late 1800s, Britain's booming patent medicine industry churned out endless cures for foul miasma. Scented candles, camphor balls, vinegars steeped in herbs, each hawked as a magical shield against unseen threats. Some households burned dried juniper or sweet-smelling pine cones in the fireplace, convinced the perfumed smoke chased away deadly vapors. Historians debate whether these fragrant rituals offered any true relief or only a false sense of safety. Picture yourself standing beside a delicate side table stacked with glass bottles, liniments, syrups, elixirs, each wrapped in promises as ornate as their labels. Cholera mixture, typhoid preventative tonic, pectoral balsam for ague and grip. Quack doctors and traveling salesmen, knew just how to slip these into drawing rooms, hungry for reassurance. After all, when a neighbor fell ill and the front curtains were drawn tight, a drop of rose-scented tincture seemed a small price for peace of mind. Quirks peek from every corner, recipes for disinfecting with sponges soaked in vinegar and salt, or a bowl of onions cut fresh and set under the bed to absorb pestilence. Some families trusted lumps of camphor pinned to a child's nightgown. Others tucked rosemary sprigs into pillows or stuffed them behind picture frames, believing they cleansed more than stale wallpaper paste. Listen as the lady of the house lifts a match to the candle wick. She watches the flame catch its little flare, throwing soft shadows across a silver tea service. There's comfort in that glow, a polite fiction that sweetened smoke might bar the door to whatever cough lingers upstairs. The butler adjusts the drapes. The maid sets fresh flowers beside the candle lavender and hyssop for luck. And somewhere outside, the fog curls in anyway damp and indifferent. Historians still puzzle over how willingly these families trusted to fragrance and folklore. Was it ignorance, or a desperate wish that the same delicate perfumes laced through their letters and bath soaps could defend against the filth flowing unseen beneath floorboards and through pipes that rattled behind the walls? Lean closer to the flame now. Smell the mingled wax and dried herbs, the soft sting that tickles your nose. Picture a visitor stepping into this room, reassured by its sweet scent and the calm nod of the hostess. Oh, we're quite well here. The air is so fresh with this candle burning. Meanwhile, somewhere deeper in the house, a cough thickens in a sick room hidden behind a closed door. You see the truth flicker in that small flame. These cures did little to cleanse the air, but offered a comfort deeper than science, a belief that gentility, fine sense, and polite habits could keep the darkness out. And maybe in a city thick with horse-dung coal dust and overcrowded tenements, a room that smelled of rose oil and pine was a fragile sanctuary worth every penny squandered on snake oil. So stand here one moment longer. Let the scented smoke curl around your sleeves, warm and soft as a lullaby. Outside, carriages clatter over wet cobblestones. Inside, the candle burns low, whispering its fragrant promise that all is well, even when the air knows better. The candle guttering on the mantel has almost burned to nothing, now its last curl of scented smoke drifting past the darkened window. Outside, the street is quiet, but not silent. Somewhere, a carriage wheel rattles on cobbles, slick with rain, and the distant bark of a dog breaks the hush before fading again into London's endless nighttime hum. Inside this respectable house, the drawing room dozes under a blanket of half-spent warmth. But if you listen closely, leaning into the hush behind the curtains, you might hear footsteps far heavier than a doctor's or a polite caller's. The steady scrape of boots at the threshold, the faint clatter of a spade set down by the railings. Tonight, the gravediggers wait ready to collect the final debts, whispered by damp parlors and scented candles that failed to cleanse anything at all. One cold fact to settle beside the flickering coals in Victorian Britain: undertakers and gravediggers did a brisk trade in every outbreak season. Their carts rolled down back lanes at dawn and dusk, careful not to draw too many eyes, especially near the polished doors of families who insisted all was well behind their velvet drapes. Historians still debate whether these quiet industries of death were respected trades or faintly scandalous shadows best left unmentioned during daylight hours. Picture yourself standing at the edge of a cemetery just beyond the gas-lit rows of brick houses. Frost crunches beneath your boots as you watch men in mufflers and rough coats, lower another coffin into earth, gone slick with winter rain. Perhaps a discreet black carriage waits nearby, its lanterns dimmed to keep the neighbors from counting how many times it calls in a single week. A tidy receipt passes hands funeral arrangements, noted in neat copperplate script payment, settled by candlelight before the next dawn. Back at the townhouse, the family's heavy drapes remain drawn, muffling the creak of the door as the gravedigger's helper slips inside just long enough to remove the departed under the hush of polite secrecy. No public show of mourning yet. First, the household must recover its composure, smooth its skirts, polish its silver once more. Respectability demands grief. Be neat, sanitized, and above all, kept indoors. Quirks bloom like weeds along these cemetery paths. In many cities, families paid extra to ensure graves were dug deep enough to discourage stray dogs or unscrupulous resurrectionists. Iron railings ringed burial plots to protect the dearly departed from grave robbers eager to sell fresh cadavers to medical schools still short on lawful specimens. Undertakers sometimes offered discreet hygienic burials, claiming special sealed coffins could stop disease from leaching back into crowded city soil, though science said otherwise. Step closer to the graves now, and you see another truth. Not all were buried equal. The poorest families scraped together pennies for a plot shared with strangers. The bare earth turned and turned again each season. But even among the respectable, a modest stone and a tidy funeral might mask how many bodies lay beneath, stacked deeper than mourners wished to know. In cities, bursting at their seams, the dead jostled the living for space underground, and in drawing rooms still warm with polite lies, families whispered prayers that their sealed windows scented candles, and polite hands might hold out just long enough to keep the gravedigger's knock from their own door. Sometimes it worked. Often, it only delayed the inevitable shuffle from hearth to sickbed, from sickbed to cart, from cart to earth. Historians puzzle over the delicate hypocrisy. How did families cling so fiercely to spotless carpets and gleaming candelabras, yet accept the quiet inevitability of these busy seasons of death? Was it stoicism, Victorian grit, polished bright by empire's grandeur, or a simple truth that when sewage ran under polished floors and germs rode in on lace gloves, all the civility in the world couldn't keep the gravedigger waiting long? Pause one last moment at the edge of that graveyard path. Feel the cold stone under your palm, the hush of fog settling on iron railings. Somewhere nearby, another candle flickers in another drawing room. Another polite cough stirs behind heavy curtains, and a spade leaning against a wall waits patiently for tomorrow's work, knowing that in this city of velvet and secrets, business is always good. When the night is damp and the air is still, step away from the cold hush of gravestones and lean back into the last stubborn warmth of a Victorian house, its drawing room flickering with a final glow of candlelight curtains pulled tight against the winter street. Here, in this quiet room, thick with secrets, one last truth waits: the hidden epidemics that slipped through parlors and pantries and pipes left behind something larger than fear or grief. They reshaped how families, cities, and entire nations thought about the air. They breathed the water they drank, and the unseen world lurking behind polished brass and embroidered cushions. Pull up an armchair close to the fire one last time. Imagine the faint echo of every cough that rattled the teacups, every hush that sealed a sick room door, every clink of silver passed by unwashed hands. One family after another learned slowly and grimly that no lace curtain or lavender sachet could hold back disease forever. And so inch by inch they changed. One fact that lingers like a draft under the parlor door: the same drawing rooms that once shut out fresh air began reluctantly at first to fling windows wide. Great movements for sanitary reform swept through Britain's cities in the late 19th century. New plumbing snaked under streets, carrying sewage far from places where children played and servants scrubbed vegetables for supper. Ventilation shafts were cut into walls, once sealed tight against the cold. Bedchambers lost their heavy drapes. Parlors traded musty velvet for lighter, airier curtains that could be washed, aired, and rehung with pride. Historians still debate how much this slow revolution owed to science alone, or to the stubborn lessons whispered by so many quiet deaths behind closed doors. Germ theory rose piece by piece, driven by men like Pasteur and Lister. Yet it was the ordinary family, the mother scrubbing hands raw with carbolic soap, the father demanding a city sewer connection, the maid cracking a window when no one was looking, who turned theory into daily ritual. Picture the quirks of this hidden victory patent soap sold by the block to households proud of their modern habits. Glass bottles of disinfectant, once snake oil, now mixed to true recipes that killed more than just bad smells. Advertisements bragged of healthy homes where fresh air moved freely, and servants boiled linens in scalding water instead of dabbing them with lavender alone. And then there were the gardens, no longer just damp corners, where ferns bred mildew behind the piano, but fresh air sanctuaries carved from city streets. London's parks bloomed under public demand for space to breathe. Windows widened. Narrow staircases gave way to larger landings designed to keep air flowing, carrying away the invisible guests that once lingered where families whispered polite excuses for every fever. If you stand here now, ghosting through this final drawing room, you might hear the soft, hopeful rattle of a window latch pushed open. A child's cough might still echo from a back bedroom, but next to it sits a wash basin filled with steaming soap towels drying on a line instead of gathering damp on a shuttered rack. The father nods to the new iron pipes outside, confident they carry away what his father once believed good manners could contain. Historians argue whether the true hero was science, the stubborn practicality of ordinary people, or the quiet dread that lingered long enough to shame an empire into scrubbing its floors and cleaning its drains. Maybe it was all three, an uneasy alliance of fear, invention, and the restless human habit of surviving no matter how well we try to keep up appearances. So rest here a moment longer, your eyes drifting over a hearth that once hosted 1,000 polite conversations, each one spinning laughter and gossip through air, now cleaner than any candle could sweeten. Listen for the soft hiss of a radiator in the corner, a quiet promise that warmth no longer demands closed windows and stale air. Outside the city that once bred so many secrets rumbles on trains, in tunnels, pipes under pavements, tap water running clear into basins scrubbed bright. The drawing room survives, but so do the lessons its hidden epidemics forced into the world beyond lace curtains. And you sitting in its final hush know this: sometimes history hides behind velvet and tea trays, but sometimes it breaks through, insisting that tomorrow's polished room must open its windows wide, must let in the wind, must wash its hands before lifting the next silver teapot. So breathe in, let it go. Imagine the curtain fluttering as clean air spills into this once stifled room. The candle gutters out, no longer needed to mask stale secrets, and the old pipes hum softly with water drawn from a safer source than the last century ever knew. Rest easy now. The drawing room is quiet. The hidden guests have been shown the door. And outside, the dawn waits with fresh air for anyone brave enough to pull the curtain back and let it in. And now, as the last echoes of these hidden Victorian drawing rooms fade, you can feel the hush settle soft and deep, like dust on velvet, or warm air rising from a cooling hearth. Let your mind drift through those polished parlors, those narrow sick rooms, the damp pantries and humming pipes that once tangled comfort and peril together behind lace curtains. There's something strangely soothing in knowing how people centuries ago sat beside flickering fires, half listening to coughs in the next room, whispering polite fictions that could never fully hold back what lingered unseen. Yet from all that hush and secrecy came lessons we carry, still a window, cracked open, a bar of soap left by a basin, a habit of washing hands before we pour the next cup of tea. Feel the old candle smoke fade from your thoughts now. Let the soft tick of your own room's quiet take its place. Breathe in the idea that history, no matter how dusty or hidden, has a way of drifting forward, brushing our lives in small, invisible ways. May your dreams tonight wander gentle halls where no fever waits behind the door. May your pillow feel light as fresh air. And may you wake when you do reminded that even the quietest stories can reshape the rooms we call home. Sweet dreams, sleeper. Rest well beneath clean sheets and open windows. No grave diggers at the gate tonight, only the soft promise of dawn.